Okay, this is a regular meeting of the zoning board, Fairhaven Zoning Board of Adjustment. Adequate notice of this meeting has been given pursuant to the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act. At the time of the board reorganization in January of this year, the board adopted its regular meeting schedule for the year. Notice of the meeting was sent to and published in the Asbury Park Press on January 19th, 2022, and the Two River Times on January 20th, 2022. That notice was also posted on the bulletin board in Borough Hall and has remained continuously posted there as required by the statute. A copy of the notice is and has been available to the public and is on file at the office of the Borough Clerk. A copy of the notice has also been sent to such members of the public as have requested such information in accordance with the statute. Adequate notice having been given, the board secretary is directed to include this statement in the minutes of the meeting. Roll call, please, Sandy.
Mr. Nick Chesney,
Here.
Ms. Quigley, Mr. Ridgway,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Here.
Mr. La Barbera,
Here.
Dr. Lawfer,
Here.
Mr. Kinsella,
Here.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Here.
Mr. Leader.
Here. Would you please join me in a salute to the flag? We have our backup flag ready.
Oh my God, it's not here again.
Look to the moon.
Jeez.
There
Hold
is a flag. There is a flag on the moon. If everybody
Hold
knows
on
carefully.
one sec. Oh my God, I was all ready today.
No worries.
It's just-
Now,
I don't know what just happened. Hold on.
There you
I
go.
re-
There it is.
Oh,
there it is.
Pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag
of
of the United States of America
The Republic.
and to the republic
To the republic
Should
for
stand.
which it stands, one
one
nation,
nation,
Under
under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
liberty and justice
for all.
Okay, before proceeding with the formal meeting tonight, I'd like to say a few words to the applicants, their experts in the audience about the role and authority of the Fairhaven Zoning Board of Adjustment. The board is a separate and independent municipal legal entity, and its limited authority is specifically set forth in the borough ordinances and the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law. It is quasi judicial in nature, and the members of the board are unpaid volunteers appointed by the mayor and council. The zoning board does not enact the borough land use laws and regulations. The borough council does that. The zoning board does not enforce the land use laws of the borough of Fairhaven. This is the responsibility of the borough code enforcement officer. This board deals with appeals for relief from the requirements of the borough's land use laws or denials by the zoning officer. An applicant is never entitled to a variance, also known as an exception to the zoning regulations, but must meet specific criteria required by the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law and the Fairhaven ordinances by satisfying certain required standards of proof. The board has no authority to waive these requirements. The burden of proof is always on the applicant to show that he or she is entitled to the specific relief requested. The applicant must prove that a deviation from the regulations will advance the purposes of the ordinance and that the deviations would substantially outweigh any detriment to the zone plan. Variances relate to the future use of the land and are not intended or authorized to remedy temporary or unique personal situations. I have now mixed up the order of these things as if I have never done this before. So that's the first time we've done this in this sequence. Okay, so welcome everyone. We have two matters on the agenda tonight. First is the Nick application and the second is the Gares and Vital matter. I hope I'm pronouncing those names right. Nick is an application that we heard in February and we carried and we're ready now for the applicant on Nick.
And while we're doing that, Mr. Chairman, we're going to indicate for the record that Mr. La Barbera is recusing himself with regard to this matter. So Sandy's going to demote him and send him back to the attendees bullpen, I guess. And if we can't do that, we'll just ask him to turn off his video and mute himself. There we go. And if I may, we're going to swear in Ms. Gable, our professional planner, and Mr. Kennedy, our professional engineer. Ms. Gable, first, you do swear in testimony to give the board to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Kennedy, you do swear in testimony to give the board to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much. They've been sworn. Do we have Mr. Von Arx?
So if you're in the gallery and you are part of this application, please raise your hand. And Sandy will bring you up into the main room here.
Where am I?
There's Mr. Von Arx.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Can we
thank you so much.
Can we see you? Can we see you, Mr. Von Arx, or do you have video?
We do. Bear with us a second.
Okay.
Jill, our tech person here in. I think. Good evening, all. Thank you for your courtesy in continuing the matter from your last meeting. Brooks Von Arx again appearing on behalf of Mr. Nick, the applicant in this matter. Since we met with you 2 months ago, there have been a number of substantial changes made to the plans. I'll kind of summarize them, and then they can be more fully described in the testimony of Mr. Malajewski, our engineer, and the architect, as well as Ms. Gaffone, who is also available to testify this evening. I would like to point out to the board that a substantial reduction has been made in the height of the house, which brings it into conformity with the ordinance. Previously, the height was set at about 32 feet. It has now been reduced to slightly less than 30 feet. Similarly, the garage addition, which is proposed for the south side of the building, has been moved back so that that addition conforms to a 30-foot setback in accordance with the ordinance. In addition to being set back, the entry doors to the garage have been switched to the side, thereby allowing the cars to enter and exit on the south side rather than on the street side of the property. The driveway has also been reconfigured so as to allow a turnaround opposite the garage doors, and also somewhat refined as we come in from the street. Additionally, we have proposed an evergreen hedge along the property line to our north, which of course we share with the Fisk Chapel. And that would be an evergreen hedge, which would be effective all year long. We have slightly changed the configuration of the porch. And with that, I would ask that Mr. I'm sorry, Greg, Dolanguski enter the scene here and make some comments.
Mr. Von Arx, before we proceed, can you please list the variances that are triggered by the plans that you're proposing to proceed with tonight? If you could just kind of list the variances top to bottom. I appreciate your summary of what's been adjusted and variances that you've removed.
Well, the conditions, as I understand them, relative to nonconformities on this property are: number one, we have a slight deficiency in the lot depth. Although the lot frontage is substantially greater than what the ordinance requires, the lot depth is 91.5 feet, whereas 100 feet is required. That's obviously something that can't be changed because it's there. Also, the front yard setback for the original building in which is being maintained is 16.4 feet, whereas 30 feet is required. The number of stories is 3. That exists as we speak, and that's largely triggered by the fact that we have an attic, even though it's a non-usable space. It is considered to be a half story, and that compared with the cellar brings us to 3 stories rather than the allowable 2.5 stories. There is a side yard setback to the north which is 5.5 feet, whereas 7 feet is required under the ordinance. That's essentially a continuation of existing condition. The FAR is at 38, whereas 35 is required by the ordinance. And the habitable floor area is 3,113 square feet, whereas 2,848 square feet is allowed by the ordinance. And the justification for that, we will be addressing later in the presentation.
I just want to ask a couple of clarifications with regard to the lot depth. It's deficient, but you're not doing anything to change it. So it's a pre-existing nonconformity, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. With regard to the front yard setback, I know that there's an existing structure that you're working with. I understand its placement is already set. At least that's my understanding. Are you building in that setback and creating an exacerbation of that condition?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And with regard to the side yard setback, is there an exacerbation of the existing deficiency, or do you have an existing condition that you're simply proposing to leave alone?
An existing condition, as I understand it.
Mr. Von Arx, I see the existing, oh, I'm sorry.
Just one more thing. With regard to the stories, you mentioned the cellar and the attic. We have lots of homes that have cellar and attic, but we don't encounter this. Is the attic habitable?
I am told by the architect that it is not habitable.
All right, so we'll need to dig into that a little bit more because that's not usually an issue that arises, but thank you for the clarification. I'm sorry, Peter.
Thanks, Todd. Mr. Von Arx, I see on the plot plan, the existing setback to the house is 20 feet, but it's 16.4 feet to the new steps. So that is an exacerbation of the existing nonconformity.
Yeah, the main building doesn't change, but the porch will bring it in. You're correct. I
So the
stand
setback
corrected.
is changing. Okay.
Slightly, yes.
Well,
Okay, Mr. Von Art, is that all, Peter?
three and a half feet. But okay, yeah, I'm done. Thanks, Todd.
Okay.
Okay, may I call Mr. Domolowski, please?
Okay, Mr. Domolowski, would you give us your full name, spell your last and your address for the record, please?
Sure. My name is Gregory Domolowski. Last name is spelled Domalewski. And my business address is 5 Commerce Way, Hamilton, New Jersey. And I'm employed by Mid-Atlantic Engineering. And I can go through my credentials. I know last time I was sworn, but I'm happy to go through them again for the board if necessary.
Well, you were, as I recall, you were accepted at the February 3, 2022 meeting of the board.
Yes.
So unless the board members want to hear your credentials again, normally we don't repeat
No, but
them.
I'll just set on the record, the only change in my license is that my license was renewed and I did my professional development hours as required under the state statute.
Okay, so I am going to, I know we swore you in earlier, but out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to swear you in. If you raise your right hand. You do swear in testimony to give the board of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Do we want to mark any plans, Mr. Von Arx? I know there were some revisions before Mr. Domolowski testifies, or do you want to do that later?
The plans that have been submitted should be marked in
Okay.
order.
Is that your plot plan, Mr. Domolowski, one sheet, July 26, 2021, revised through March 11, 2022?
Yes.
I believe, Sandy, and you can check me, we're up to Exhibit A-7. So that'll be Exhibit A-7. Is there anything else you want to mark at this point? I assume just your plot plan for now. Is that right, Mr. Domolowski?
Also the architectural plans as well, prepared by Prestige Design Group.
5 sheets, October 4, 2021, revised through March 11, 2022,
That's correct.
A-8. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Domolowski, you've heard my summary as to the changes which have been made to the plans. You're obviously familiar with the engineering plans, and I believe you've been intimately involved with the architectural plans as well. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Since the change of the last hearing and discussions that occurred the last hearing, I got very involved as far as the layout goes with the client, the whole team. I'm very aware of what changes were made, and I like to walk through those changes to the architectural plans this time, and then I'll walk through the changes to the plot plan once I go through those architectural plans.
Okay, could you first address the height situation?
Absolutely. So our height was previously submitted with a height of 31.9 feet of height on our last plot plan. And since then, we have reduced the overall height and ridge elevation of the building so that it has a total height of 29.54 feet now from average grade to the peak elevation of the roof.
I just want to interject real quick, Mr. Von Arx. I recognize that there were originally plans that were submitted and that you've substantially revised them, and that you are highlighting the important fact that you're reducing the list of required variances. However, this is so substantially different from what you originally submitted. Please don't lose sight of the fact that we're all kind of looking at this for the first time, right? And so I just, please feel free to highlight it, but let's not lose sight of sort of presenting it as, as a plan, so that we all understand, where these variances tie in and how the design, really triggers those variances so we can evaluate what's left.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. We just want to emphasize to the board, I think, by citing these changes, that my client is trying to cooperate as much as possible to make this project work. So I would like the board to understand that these changes have been made in that direction.
And just to interject, I'll certainly present them. I'm happy to share and, put the architectural plans up on screen right now. We can walk you guys through it, if that's acceptable.
Sure
May
thing.
Let's do that.
All right, so I'm now sharing right now. So I'm sharing exhibit A8 right now, which are the architectural plans prepared by Prestige Design Group, last revised March 11th, 2022. And what you have up on here on screen is the proposed first floor or basement floor level. And here you'll see the existing basement on the left and the proposed basement on the right. And what you see on the ground floor here is we do have the same proposed guest bedroom. We have the same walkout to the rear as we submitted last time. At the front here, we did add a utility room to be able to use for the services into the building. And on the right here, you'll see this new garage, which we have on the east side of the building here. And we'll sort of talk about that as we get up into the upper floors. But that's the area that's unexcavated underneath the garage and the other areas. For the first floor, we reconfigured it slightly. So we took the garage, we slid it back, we changed it from a 2-car garage to a 1-car garage. We now have a proposed den, which incorporates a series of windows along the front and the facade facing the neighbors there, put eyes on the street. And also we have, instead of the walkout back porch and staircase down, we now have an enclosed mudroom at the rear to allow access to the driveway direct without having to go through the garage every time you go in and out of the house.
Now,
In that
if I may interject, there's a 1-car garage. Does the plan allow sufficient room for 3 vehicles to be parked inside of the front yard setback line?
It provides enough to have 3 parking spaces beyond the front yard setback line, so out of the front yard. Yes. And we have a 1-car garage door, and I know one of the planner's comments was dressing up that garage door, and the client's happy to, dress up that garage door subject to availability at the time of materials. So it's going to be dressed up somehow with some sort of decorative door, but again, subject to the type of door that's available. It won't be your standard, garage door going in there. So for the first floor, the large majority of the proposed layout remains the same. You have the covered front porch that enters along the front of the building, and you have the entire covered front porch here that goes along the entire front facade covered in to help with a couple of things. Number one is to break up that front facade so you don't have just a tall wall of just siding there, you have an architectural element there of that decorative roof. And then it also provides cover in case it rains or anything like that. Somebody has a little bit more area to walk under that's covered and protected from the elements. The dining room, kitchen, and living room layout remain the same as the last application, with the majority of the change happening on the right-hand side here, where you see that that garage is shifted out of the 25-foot required setback for a attached garage, as well as you see the proposed den-in office with the windows and that mudroom like I talked about. So now we're going to move up.
I have a couple of questions before you go to the second floor. So
Okay.
with regard to the garage itself, so you're showing a footprint of a garage on the basement floor, the cellar floor, and then you're showing the footprint of the garage on the first floor. What is the ceiling height inside of the garage? I mean, is this standard height, or is it taller than that, or what is the situation there?
Standard height garage.
Okay.
And we'll get to the elevation in a second, and we'll sort of walk through, what that all looks like from the street side.
Okay, so can you go back to the basement plan, please, or the cellar
Sure.
plan?
Yep.
So with regard to this plan, I guess I'm confused as to how we have a standard height garage and we have a cellar. Is the cellar
So-
beneath?
No, so that's just the footing and foundation. So that's all slab on grade and crawl space. So that's a crawl space under the mudroom and a crawl space under the den with a slab on grade for the garage. This does not occur at the same elevation as the actual basement. This will be elevated to your standard 3-foot footing depth. These dashed lines here are going to be your standard footing that goes around this foundation here. It's not going down to the full basement depth. It's actually raised up from the basement floor for those footings.
Okay, so whatever you have for front steps to get up to the first floor off of grade, you're going to have an extra 3 steps or feet inside of the garage. So it's slightly taller than, just the 8 or the 9-foot ceiling height that you'd have between the basement
Correct.
and the first floor. Okay.
Correct,
Now-
but we're not doing like a 15-foot garage ceiling with, an entire staircase up or anything like that, no.
Yep,
So you're
I understand
standing-
it better now.
Yep.
Tell me about the utility room.
Sure, so the utility room is going to be used for services coming into the building. And just, the utilities that are required to run the house, the furnace, the hot water heater, all that kind of stuff.
And is this a cellar or a basement? Is this counting against our square footage cap?
It does count against your square footage, and it's a basement.
Okay, and is the utility room included within the numbers with regard to the total size of the house?
It is not.
And is there a reason it is not?
It's just the way the code is written that utility rooms are not counted towards the square footage.
All right, so let's put a pin in that and we'll revisit that later.
So now we'll move up to the second floor, if that's all right.
Mr. Domalewski, I had a
Yes.
question about the first floor. Please confirm
Sure.
that you're moving the front yard setback 3 feet, 8 inches closer to the road.
We are. So the existing building, and I was going to get to that when I go through the plot plan again, but the existing structure is set back 20 feet from the front yard, and that does reduce down to 16.4 feet with the proposed, covered front porch and walkway across that front facade. And it is requested by the planner. It was one of the architectural features we included for the house to break up that front facade. So again, I'll go up to the second floor if that's all right, unless anybody else has any questions about the first floor. All right,
Yeah, actually, I had a quick question about the first floor.
sure.
So when I'm looking at the proposed first floor plan next to the existing first floor plan, I see the steps that go out on the existing first floor plan, and they appear to go out as far as the porch on the new proposed first floor plan.
Yeah, so on the survey, I can give you an exact distance here. Give me 1 second. And adjust my scale on my. They stick out about 3 foot 2 inches.
Right, so the 20 feet that you have as existing front yard setback, is that to the facade of the house or to the first step that
So
goes more than 6 inches above grade?
That
On the
20
existing.
foot, yep, that 20 foot distance actually goes to the front wall of the house.
Okay, so on the existing
And-
to the front of whatever step rises above 6 inches from grade, what is the existing setback? Does those count towards the setback?
That is approximately, and I have to say approximately because I'm not in AutoCAD doing the dimension, I'm in, PDF doing it. It's approximately 16.5 feet.
And
So your
your
setback's about the
proposed,
same then.
It's about the same. My understanding was that covered structures would count towards the setback. And I didn't know if stairs would or not, but.
anything above 6 inches above grade.
So then, yeah, you're changing it from the existing stairs that go up 6 inches. From what I'm scaling off on the survey, that's 16.5 feet now, and we're going to 16.4 feet.
Thank
So
you.
we are increasing the variance, but by about a 10.
And are there stairs in front of that 16.4 feet?
There are not. So that covered porch, actually, the stairs are sideways along the front facade and lead out straight out towards the driveway now. So instead of those stairs sticking perpendicular towards the street, they are sideways towards the driveway now. And you can see them on the first floor plan here. You see the 3 steps right here. There's 4 steps that kind of come up onto that porch.
So just to clarify what we're looking at then, we have an existing front yard setback that needs to be calculated to the top of the first step, wherever it hits above 6 inches. The proposal exacerbates the non-conforming condition because it creates new structure in that area. So rather than just the simple steps, you have a whole porch, but the steps go to the side. So it's within a few inches of where you sit relative to your stairs. So that's just cleanup to be sure that we understand what we're talking about.
Yes, and that structure would be across the entire frontage of that existing building that's there now, the existing house that's there today. That porch extends across the entire, facade of what's there today.
So with regard to the porch that faces the north, Mr. Von Arx had said that what we had was a side yard setback requirement of 7 and an existing condition at 5.5, and that he understood that we were not exacerbating the non-conforming condition. So that would suggest that porch complies with the 7 feet. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And above that kitchen area as shown on the first floor, do you have new structure being built within the setback, or is that also in conformance?
We don't, that's in conformance now. And then when we get up to the second floor, I'll show you what we did there.
Thank you.
So we're not exacerbating the existing side yard setback.
That's correct.
Not laterally, not vertically, not at all.
The roof line is changing there. I just want to point that out when they see the
Yes,
elevation.
the roof line changes, however, habitable structure is not changing inside that. And the front porch is not being built within the side yard setback.
Well, as a cleanup exercise, let's look at it more carefully later. To the extent that you're building new structure inside of the 7-foot setback, then it would be an exacerbation. It may be de minimis, but it's something we should properly note.
Okay. All right, you ready to move on to the second floor?
Looks like it.
All right. So as you see here, the existing second floor plan currently has 2 bedrooms up there and a bathroom with no, structure over this existing, I'll call it the kitchen now because that's what it is. And what you see here is, what we've done here is from the old design, we eliminated 1 bedroom up on this level. So there used to be a bedroom that extended out over that kitchen. We got rid of that. And what you have here are 3 bedrooms on the upper floor, along with bathrooms for the bedrooms, along with walk-in closets. The master bedroom is going to have a walk-in closet and a bathroom. The bedroom number 1, which is along the front facade, is again going to have a walk-in closet and a bathroom. And off the back, there's the 3rd bedroom up here. Again, is also going to have its own bathroom and a little closet in there. And basically, this is a result of moving some stuff around, on the lower floor, moving that garage backwards. Sort of, this is a space that the architect had to work with when we went to the design, and sort of made everything fit into the space upstairs. The bathrooms, the closets, all that kind of stuff.
Can you scroll that a little bit back to the left?
Sure.
Thanks. Just back to the last point about the side yard setback. If you look on the existing, you'll see that that roof over the kitchen is a hipped, and you see that the proposed is a gable end. Right, so that gable end is your exacerbation of the side yard setback, where it used to be a hipped roof.
Correct.
Okay, so you're extending a little bit vertically into that.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And is that a 1.5 foot overhang that where you show the dotted line on the existing drawing on the left?
Let me take a look. I'll measure that for you real quick.
You can see the reason I'm asking, right? Because the porch lines up with the exterior of the structure, and confused as to how that is inside of that setback.
It's almost a 1 foot overhang shown on the plan.
All right, I think we need to get some clarification as to whether or not that the new porch that runs along that side is inside of that 7 foot or not.
Yep, I can tell you from the plot plan, it is not. It is not inside the front yard setback or the side yard setback. In fact, the existing wood porch was lined up with the structure, and the proposed wood porch does step in from the edge of the structure. And I can bring up the plot plan if that helps clarify it for you guys, and then we can come back to the architectural plans if that helps.
Let's do that.
Certainly. So what I'm bringing up on screen right now is Exhibit A7. It's the plot plan prepared by Mid-Atlantic Engineering, dated March 11th, 2022. So on the existing, sorry, I'm just going to take my dimension off here that I had added to it. So in the existing structure, this 1-story structure, the 5.5 side yard setback occurs up in the corner here of the 1-story where it pinches down to the neighboring fixed chapel lot. And the existing wood porch does line up to the existing side yard or the existing structure facade right here. So when we come over to the proposed, this existing exterior wall remains unchanged. And now what happens is this front porch now jogs out from that sidewall to narrow down a little bit to be sure that it's outside of that front yard set or the side yard setback of 7 feet.
It looks different on the plot plan than it does on the architectural. I think it's clear on the plot plan as you describe it that you'll avoid it, but the architectural looks a lot closer. But we'll accept the testimony for what it is, I think.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to Exhibit A8 now. And what I'm gonna do is introduce the facades now that the architect had prepared. And these are, I'm gonna try and, I was trying to zoom up a little bit here to get, hold on 1 second. Nope. Trying to just fit everything up on screen here for you guys and not, so you can see a little better. All right, so what you see here is the existing front elevation on the left-hand side, the proposed front elevation on the right-hand side. The roof does increase slightly from the existing, the roof ridge elevation. I know there was some testimony last time about how close we were or were not. But with some additional measurements, clarifications on the architectural plans, the facade, the roof ridge does go up just slightly from, I'll give you two elevations, from 75.94 up to 77.04. And that is a difference of 1.1 feet, it increases. And what you see here is on the right-hand side, we have the proposed front elevation. And you'll see here, we have the gable roof over that existing structure. So here you see the hip roof, and we have the gable roof over here that extends straight out. And then we have the hip roof, the gable roof on the second floor across the entire structure. We also have a little hip roof here that extends off the front for some added architectural features to break up that front facade. Same thing about this covered roof that extends out over the porch. It breaks up this front facade on this sort of structure that sticks out right now, where you see the front facade before did have that hip roof on it. And we have the covered porch, and here are the additional windows on the ground floor that we talked about that enter into that den. Moving on to the rear elevation. Again, you see the rear elevation windows. You have the gable roof up top. You have the gable roof over the kitchen, and you have the walkout basement here that we had shown you before on the floor, on the basement floor. Again, from the front facade, no more garage doors, straight out from the street. I'm going to move on to the side elevations now, and you'll see those garage doors as well as the opposite side. So on the top here, you have the existing left side elevation, which is the elevation that faces the Fisk Chapel. We have the gable roof ends that you see here, the section over the kitchen, and as well as over the second floor. Not as steep of a pitch as it was before. It's flattened out to bring down that roof peak elevation. And again, you have that gable roof coming off the front to cover up the bedroom that's proposed up there. And then the covered front porch that you would see, or maybe not see with the evergreens there, that faces towards that Fisk Chapel. And moving down, we have the elevation that faces the right side of the plan. We have the entrance to the covered front porch. We have the window here that goes out to the den. We have our garage door, which we're going to dress up and make fancier than just your standard off-the-shelf garage door. And you have the door entry into the mudroom here. And then upstairs, you have a window into the bedroom up there. And again, the heights have been brought down. So your building height is 29.54 feet, where we were 31.9 feet previously. And if anybody has any questions about the facades, I can answer them. If anybody does not, then I'd like to move on to the plot plan to go through the engineering testimony at this time.
Do we have direct access from the exterior of the house to the basement?
Yes, we do. So on the rear facade, you have this door down here. This is the direct access from the basement with a sliding door that goes into that basement.
Okay, and there are no cooking facilities in the basement?
There are not.
So if in fact the board sees fit to grant the relief, the board may want to consider whether you want a deed restriction, no cooking facilities, no kitchen, no second dwelling unit as a result of the direct access to the basement from the exterior. That's up to the board.
So is the applicant proposing as part of the application to commit to the board and batten siding as shown on the plans?
Yes.
And is the applicant proposing to use a metal roof where shown on the plans?
Yes.
And you've testified that the applicant is agreeable to installing a decorative garage door as has been suggested by the planner?
Yes.
What's the finish for the basement? What is the coating of the basement walls, which shows as white on the plans?
It's going to be a parge coated CMU block with a painted finish.
So part of the problem with the way this house sits is that from the street, you can't really see that it has this full third floor. But as soon as you get around to Fisk Chapel, which is a very, important building in town, and to the rear, you see all of it. It's a real 3-story building. Is there anything that can be done to that level beyond porch coating that would make it more attractive?
What would you suggest?
I don't know.
Or perhaps the board members have some suggestions that might be considered by the applicant.
So the issue is the overall height of the building, you've got a measurement at less than 30. But it's certainly going to look a lot taller than 30 from different angles, and certainly going to look a lot bigger than 30 from this chapel. So I don't know what the architectural trick might be to make it look normal. But I would suggest to you that having 7 foot of exposed basement wall with porch coating might not. So I don't know. I just raised that issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways we can do some things engineering wise. So right now you see this grade sort of drops off at the back here. We may be able to bury some more of this foundation so it absorbs some more of that. Transition the grade so you sort of have maybe some, a hill and maybe some landscaping up against that foundation rather than just, all concrete there.
I would just point out to the board that, as I'm looking at it, well, maybe I would ask the question from the top of from the first floor elevation, the top of the porch to the ridge height. What is that height of the structure itself?
I'm sorry, from where?
From the top of the porch, the finished first floor elevation, effectively.
So the first floor elevation is 53.04. Let me just grab my. So you're at 77.04 to 53.04.
Stacked stone.
It's 24 feet from the porch to the ridge.
So from this side, it's only going to be 31 feet tall total, effectively, as you look at it from the rear and the.
Well, from the rear, from this, the cellar slab elevation is at 45.4. So you're 31.6 feet from this exposed elevation here to the ridge.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Nick is giving me a note that he would be certainly able and willing to face that blank wall with some attractive stone and perhaps do a little bit of filling of the area so that it's not quite so obvious. And I assume that landscaping would also be entered into the picture so as to soften the whole.
Yeah, I think those are good ideas. I think we can talk about them a little bit later on. I certainly think that the stone would make that level much more attractive. Obviously, landscaping, while it's there, would be a positive. I don't know about raising grades. I know you've got a lot of challenging grades here. The last thing we want to do is create a drainage problem on the neighboring properties. I want to ask about this attic, which is described as a half story at the beginning, but it's very, very short based on how I understand this. So what is the height once you pull down the attic stairs and get into it?
That is going to be, I mean, if you're looking just, I can measure just from the ridge to about the, elevation of a joist here, would be about there. You're looking about 6.5 feet from the peak, to a joist. And that's also from the peak of the roof to a floor joist. That's not from the underside of a, the roof structure that would be up there.
Elena, when we get to you, I'd like to understand a little bit more, but maybe it's just the fact that this is a basement, not a cellar, and we don't frankly encounter a lot of basements that leads you to the 3 stories. But I don't want to, let's get into that when we talk through this all with the planner. So I think you were asking whether or not we had any further comments on the exterior. Do any board members have any questions or comments with regard to the exterior before we move on?
I just wanted to revisit one thing about that space, Mr. Chairman. On the old existing plan, it looks like there's a window there. Why was that window eliminated?
You're saying up in,
No, the elevation that faces that one there, where existing left side elevation.
It's now the
So there's a-
bathroom.
Okay. So that's a bathroom there in the basement level with no window?
yes.
Correct. If the window is on the rear side.
Mr. Von Arx, if we're gonna have somebody else testify, we better get them sworn in and know who they
Oh,
are.
sorry.
That's okay.
Mr. Nick is here, and I think he has an answer to the question as to the window placement. He was sworn, I believe, the last time.
Okay, well, does Mr. Domalewski know, or do you want me to bring it?
Yeah, so I can comment to that. You know, before down in that basement level, there was a den there or a enclosed space there, this den with the window out. And now with the toilet, shower, and vanity placement, you have to put the mirrors on the wall and all that. It didn't make sense. They're closing up that foundation and removing that window down there.
It's a shame because that would have gone quite a ways to breaking up that facade.
I mean,
Perhaps Mr. Nick could address this question.
Do
Mr.
you want to
Nick,
bring him up?
yes, please. Mr. Nick, you've heard.
Oh, sorry, I'm gonna mute myself. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Why don't we just swear him in again, Mr. Von Arx also?
Sure.
Sir, could you give us your full name, spell your last, your address for the record, please?
Alan Nick, NICK, 23 Windhill Way, Holmdel, New Jersey, 07733.
Great. And I'm going to swear you in. Do swear your testimony to give the board of you the truth, whole truth, and nothing but truth.
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Nick, would you address the question of the window that the board has just raised?
Sure, we just moved it. If you look just above the proposed guest room writing, if you look just above it, there is a window there. So currently there is no window there. The window is in the other side on the left wall, and we just adjusted.
Thank you.
That's all.
What is, so outside of that bedroom, there's a different floor area that's indicated just to the right of where that window is? Is that a wall there? What is that change in the,
this is the addition on the rear of the building.
So that's finished space, that'll be finished area that's counted, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Let's see.
All right, if no other questions about architecture, I'd like to move on to the plot plan, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
All right. So what I have up on screen now is the exhibit A7. It's the plot plan prepared by Mid-Atlantic Engineering, dated March 11th, 2022. So the existing site conditions remain unchanged from the previous plan. All the changes occur, to the proposed site. So I'm going to zoom up on this area for you guys. So one thing to highlight here is with the layout, the garage portion of the building shifted rearward, and it's now 30.5 feet setback to this wall of the den, not even just to the garage, but the whole garage wing is set back 30.5 feet from the front yard. On the left-hand side, we do have that existing 5.5 foot side yard setback, which remains to the kitchen portion of the building that we are not changing anything of, with the exception of the roof is changing from the hip roof to the gable roof above. The front porch, as we discussed before, is outside of the 7-foot setback and wraps around the front of the building and does have that 16.4 foot front setback variance, where the existing stairs are set back 16.5 feet currently. Although the front structure of the house and front wall of the house remains unchanged at 20 feet. The rear of the building has the walkout basement And we actually changed that from last time. So last time we had a completely flat walkout, and it was going to be a flush patio with grade, and that would require dropping the backyard a little bit and creating sort of a flat backyard back there. So what we did, we worked with Mr. Kennedy, and we added 2 steps out the back, 2 5-inch risers, and going to a permeable paver patio at the rear door. And then what happens there is that the majority of the backyard remains unchanged grading wise at the rear. So now the grading pattern in the backyard remains largely unchanged for a majority of that backyard. As we discussed before, the building height variance of 31.9 feet that was proposed before was eliminated, with the building height now 29.54 feet. And then we also added 10 Spartan junipers to the area of the site between the house and the Fisk Chapel to fill in with some of those existing tree lines there and the existing bushes that are there to create some, evergreen, plantings there to screen the house from the Fisk Chapel.
How big are they as proposed?
As proposed, we actually did not specify a size. We can certainly, provide a 4-foot, Spartan juniper there.
Yeah, I mean, you've only got 5.5 feet to the property boundary. You're showing, 2 feet on the inside and a foot on the outside, which is going to give you a 1 foot wide planting. As you show it, it's a very small bush. It's going to be 5 years before it provides any real screening.
Are you suggesting a bigger, a more mature bush to start with, as far as putting in like a 6 foot tall bush or something like that? I mean,
I'm observing that relative to the area that you're placing it, you're showing a plant that's very small. You're describing it as screening, and I'm pointing out that it's not going to screen very much. If what you're saying is that a larger plant would go in, then it would be different. But I'm just observing it.
Certainly. And then, like I said, we worked with the landscape architect in my firm, and that was the plant she suggested to fill in the space, something that would grow in nice and provide that, the screening, in the future. So that was her opinion of what should go there at that, to provide that screen.
You don't have a lot of room, and you don't want landscaping right against the house. What's on the other side? I know it's Fisk Chapel generally, but what is the topography and what is the vegetation immediately on the other side of the property?
So Fisk Chapel has some grade change. They come up a couple feet from our property. From our sidewall of our porch, we're at elevation 47 at the sidewall of the kitchen there. And Fisk Chapel climbs up, to elevation 49. So we're about 2 feet lower at our property than they are, a couple feet into their property. There's not a lot of vegetation there today. There's a couple of trees sporadically spread through the side of the property, but largely you can see through that area today to the existing house that's there. So the evergreen plantings will definitely help screen it. Certainly you will see through here and there, but because we're not proposing a solid green wall there. We're proposing, to sort of fill in with some of those existing trees that are going to remain and plant around them as necessary to help screen the house a little more.
The patio in the rear, you mentioned 2 steps. So is it sunken down with 2 steps down into it from the yard? Is that right?
It's correct. Yes. You go down, you come out the back slider and you walk up 2 steps to get to your grass or your backyard there. One of the things that, that Mr. Kennedy brought up in his letter was the back out space for the garage, the width of the driveway. And we've taken a look at that, and his concern was to provide a little bit more back out space for that driveway. So we're proposing to increase And if it's okay, I have a sketch. I don't know if I can introduce a sketch on a Zoom call or not, or another exhibit that has not been submitted to the board at this time. Am I allowed to?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that the exhibit be shown and that it subsequently be submitted in hard copy form so that the board's records will have it.
Sure, Mr. Irene will just mark it.
Yeah, that's fine. This is being videotaped, so we'll show it, we'll mark it, and then you can submit a hard copy to the board office.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what I'm bringing up right now is a draft version of a plot plan from Mid-Atlantic Engineering, last revised 4/7/2022. And what this shows is on the sort of the, I'll call it the east facade, southeast facade, we're showing a 20-foot back out space out of the garage, and then a 12-foot driveway. So what we did here is we necked down the driveway to allow a narrow driveway, not the entire 16-foot driveway going in, allow more back out space out of the garage for maneuverability, as well as to provide, a full, 2 spaces, if not more, behind the front yard setback outside the garage. So there's plenty of parking there as required. And then with this, the impervious coverage actually goes down a little bit. But because of the, driveway area by the garage getting increased, I think the net was only about 36 feet of differential in impervious coverage. It goes down slightly, but not dramatically. So I proposed to, make that change. It was sort of something that I talked about with Jim Kennedy, offline from the hearing, and about how to address that.
So this will be Exhibit A-9, yes?
A-9.
Thank you.
So look, as a practical matter, I don't know if Jim wants to jump in, but as a practical matter, 20 feet is not enough to actually use that garage in a standard way. And obviously any cars that you're parking there would further interfere. I think the number is actually closer to 28 feet in order to make the maneuver in less than 8, little K turns. I think the trade-off is that you're not facing the garage to the street. So, that I think that's obvious. But I don't know that if that garage is going to be used for a car, that you're then going to be able to use any of the parking spaces. You technically comply, and I'm not challenging that. But if the argument is that by increasing the width to 20 feet, that it's usable, I don't think it gets there unless Jim disagrees with me.
I don't, in a shopping center, if we were laying out a commercial parking area, it would be a 24-foot aisle for a 90-degree parking stall, such as a garage. Being that you have to maneuver between 2 walls, 24, 25, 28, 30 is normally the number we go for. 20 is relatively small, but look, it's going to be a condition that the owner of the house will need to work with, and that might reduce the size of the vehicle that they can actually place in the garage. It's not going to be an issue if they have a smaller vehicle. It's going to be an issue if it's a larger vehicle.
Jim, are there walls around this area? You mentioned walls. Are there retaining walls in here?
No, the walls, just the garage walls. Maybe they can facilitate that by increasing the size of the garage door. Instead of doing a standard 9 or 8 foot garage, maybe if they can widen it a little bit, you can actually start the turn prior to coming out.
Yeah, and just to your point, one of the reasons why we had that 20 feet there was to give enough buffer to the neighbor there, because their house is only a couple of feet off the property line. And what we didn't want to do was provide that 30 feet of back out space with a retaining wall right along the property. We felt that was not the best to do that, and that this was more it was a better design as far as considering the neighbors.
I'm interested in discussion about retaining walls because that affects the way any of this can be used. Are you saying that you're going to grade it naturally now, but that you would have to use a retaining wall if you made it wider?
If we made it wider, we would most likely need a retaining wall. Right now, it's graded naturally.
Okay, and on the site, I know you have challenging grades. Are there any other areas on the site that you're proposing to install retaining walls?
No retaining walls on site.
Okay.
And that was a concern of mine when this sketch actually came back from my design engineer that I was working with at the time. He actually sketched this out with a wall like around this corner and along the back here. And I eliminated it. I said, no, we shouldn't have any retaining walls. It helps, with kids, if they're coming out of that mudroom, they want to go out to the backyard, they want to run right down that little embankment there, not have to deal with retaining wall, all that kind of stuff. So I just felt it was best designed without any retaining walls on the property.
Is there any underground detention proposed for the site?
There is not.
Does the site have any water problems now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Greg, you testified that there's going to be a permeable paver system below the sunken patio in the back.
That's
Wanna
correct,
just go
yes,
over
because
that a little bit?
that paver, that little patio at the back door where you exit the slider is sunken, so we're going to do permeable pavers there. So that would, if any rain came down on that area, that would, infiltrate into the ground, specifically that spot. But other than that, no proposed, underground storage pipe or anything like that. No.
Can you just confirm that the driveway, that's the 16 foot wide, doesn't occupy more than 25% of the front yard area?
Correct. The 16 foot wide driveway did not. And if we go down to the 12-foot driveway as proposed on the concept sketch, it'll reduce further.
Okay.
Elena, while you're engaged, do you want to address or could you help us with understanding how we get to 3 stories?
Yes, sure. So the ordinance defines a half story as that portion of a building under a gable, hip, or gambrel roof, the wall plates of which on at least 2 opposite exterior walls are not more than 2 feet above the floor of such half story. A basement shall also be included as a half story. So I believe the attic space counts as a half story. Then you have the first and second floors, and then the basement also counts as a half story. And that's how you get to 3 stories.
So we would always have 2.5 stories. I mean, if you have an attic of any type, that's a half story. Is that what you're saying? Plus what then is the basement?
I believe so.
Okay. But 2.5 is the maximum. So 3 is a variance.
Correct.
And theoretically, with a house like this where you had to have a basement, is there a way that you can think of that you could accommodate that without having the violation on the attic?
You wouldn't have an attic then.
You just do a flat roof or something?
You could do a flat roof, or you have like a Cape Cod or something.
Where you built into it,
Yeah, that's some of like the options that I'm thinking of.
right? Elena, how about the utility room inside of the basement? What's your view as to whether or not that's habitable square footage?
So this is one of with the habitable floor area calculations. It's the room, the utility room itself is not habitable. There's no, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but there's no like air conditioning or any kind of climate control within that room.
No, there's not.
So it's my understanding then that if that's how that room is going to operate, then it wouldn't be included in the habitable floor area calculation, but the remainder of the basement does.
Right, but the problem though is if that's the analysis, they could then not finish what they're calling basement and it wouldn't count as part of the square footage. But when we start calculating square footage, we don't care about whether or not the area is conditioned. We care about whether or not the basement is exposed and not a cellar.
Right, and since it is a basement, this is one of those tricky questions in the ordinance with the habitable floor area calculation.
No, it's tricky indeed. If they put it on the first floor, would it not count?
It was on the first floor, it'd be from exterior wall to exterior wall. So I guess theoretically, it should be counted, and that if that's the case.
Yeah, I think it would count on the first floor, and I think it counts in the basement. I'm sure Ms. Cofone will have a comment with regard to that. I don't know how the other board members feel. It's there. It's a question of whether or not it should be in the number or not, and whether or not we should be assessing the calculations of square footage, with that included or excluded.
Correct. I would agree with that statement. But yes, that's with if it was a cellar, then the cellar is not included in the habitable floor area, but the basement is. So the question becomes whether the utility room, although it's not technically habitable space, is it included in the habitable floor area calculation?
And one thing I just wanted to put on the record, I don't know if I actually ran through the numbers about the habitable floor area ratio. We are proposing 0.38 for a floor area ratio and the habitable floor area of 3,113 square feet. That's just for the record. And one other thing to point out is that I know we keep talking about the basement cellar, and we certainly, discussed with Jim in length, and it's going to count as a basement. But one thing to remember here is that this building is certainly suited for this size of a lot, this house. This lot certainly supports this size house. And one thing to remember, is that I know we're not doing it, but if this house were built with a crawl space, it is completely conforming as far as floor area ratio goes in floor area on this lot. Understood that the basement is finished, so you can't exactly, compare apples to apples there, but just the overall lot size and what this lot can support. If this house were on the crawl space, it would be, appropriate, actually undersized for the amount of floor area and the floor area ratio that you could have on this lot.
Are there any other questions from the board members?
I have a couple more questions for my report, if that's all right.
Certainly.
You provided testimony about the types of materials that are proposed for the dwelling. What about for colors? I know before there was a colorized rendering with like a white house with black shutters and black trim. Is that still what's
White and
proposed?
black?
Yes, and that's still going to remain. The exterior finishes are going to remain the same. Exterior colors, rather.
And then I noticed on the some of the side elevations where it's not the board and batten siding, it's the cedar impression vinyl siding. Is that also going to be white, or do you have an idea for what color that would be?
Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna pull it up. Yep, give me 1 second and I'll load up the.
I think Mr. Nick might be able to answer that question.
Hi, guys. I'm just looking to probably match the roof or make it white just to match the existing color scheme that I'm going to go with. So white and black would be the color scheme, or something to complement the roof.
Okay, thank you. You agreed to the direct decorative garage door. Is there any thought into potentially reducing any part of the additions to better comply with the habitable floor area and the habitable floor area ratio?
This sort of goes back to testimony we provided. I think the upstairs is, sort of, we eliminated an entire bedroom up there. We certainly, sort of working around the existing structure. I think this is the best suited design to get those 3 bedrooms upstairs. And, as I said before, given the size of the actual structure of the first floor, second floor, it's in relation to the size of the lot. And it's actually, that building, for just, if you were to build a 2-story house there, is undersized for that lot. So I think it's I think it's appropriately sized for the lot as designed.
Even though you're only exceeding the cap for the zone by 93 square feet? You can't figure out a way to reduce the habitable floor area by 93?
I thought it was more than that.
It's just for the cap, not the habitable floor area square foot, not the ratio. The ratio is exceeding by about 265 square feet, and the cap for the zone is exceeding by about 93 square feet.
Really?
Mr. Von Arx said that it was 3,113 versus the cap at 2,848.
The cap for the zone I thought was 3,020.
I'm just telling you what Mr. Von Arx said or what my notes say based on what he said. It should be 3020. It's R5, 7.5.
I'm looking at the rate, I'm looking at the chart that was submitted.
Yeah, the chart did indicate 2,848 as the habitable floor area.
Right, it does.
So, but you're saying it's 3,020 square feet, 93 square feet over. I mean,
93 square feet over.
The cap for the zone. You're still going to require the ratio variance, even though you're.
Yeah, I mean, if it's acceptable, I mean, if it's acceptable, I'd like to increase the utility, room, that 93 square feet to reduce it to be in conformance.
I don't understand how big the house is, and I'd like to. What is the calculation with regard to habitable square footage of the house as proposed?
Sure. We have a basement that has 738 square feet, a first floor that has 1,193 square feet, a second floor that has 1,182 square feet, for a total of 3,113 square feet as proposed.
And where did the 2,848 number come from, Mr. Von Arx?
That was
from, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can answer that. That was from the gentleman that was assisting me with preparing the plan, taking 0.35 and multiplying it by our lot area to get 2,848 square feet. And that's the amount of square footage that would get us under the cap of the 0.35 ratio.
Right.
And he had just carried that down to the habitable floor area instead of having the 3,020 there.
Right. Elena, did we get through your stuff?
I believe so for now.
So I have a question with regard to the grade change at the southeast corner of the house. As I'm looking at the right side elevation where the garage door is, all the way to the door to the mudroom, it shows, maybe 24, 30 inches of exposed basement wall. And then when I look at the rear, you're showing what I understood to be about 7. How do we transition at that corner?
Are you referring to the elevations on the architecturals or just walk through the site plan here?
I'm looking at the architecturals as shown.
Okay. Let me load them up. Go back to this elevation. So you're talking about the rear elevation with the door? Right here?
So go to the garage door side, the right side elevation.
Yep, garage door in this.
So
walk out there.
Right, so as I'm following the plans, you've got that slab, and then you've got, a couple of feet of basement exposed, and then we come around the back.
So what's missing here actually is the grade. I'll just sketch it in here real quick in green. Does something like this. So this will be grass up to the like the driveway will come to the edge, and then it will be a little embankment that goes down off the back of the house.
And then show how that's going to look from the rear.
Sure. So likewise on the rear, the grade will actually be something more like that is where the grass line would be.
And what's that deviation there? That's about 5 feet?
From this corner down here?
Yeah, I
From
guess.
From that corner that's shown up to the It's about 4 feet to the driveway there.
Okay. What's the existing grade in that location? This is all addition, right? None of this exists there.
Yep. So I'm going back to this exhibit A7 up on screen right now. Existing grade in that area is about, well, right here, you can see there's a 50 elevation at the corner of the driveway at the door. This is the 47 contour right here, this gray dashed line.
As it exists, it's 47.
Yes,
So you're coming up in the back. You're adding soil there.
correct. Because what happens is there's a pretty substantial drop off from the house off to the side yard right now. And with this addition coming out, the grade has to be addressed around the building here. Yes. So it has to come up a little bit around this garage.
Okay. And do we have anything further?
I have one last comment from my report. On previous plans that were submitted, the existing building height was noted as being 31.5 feet. And then on this more recent submission, the existing building height decreased to about 28.4 feet. Can you provide some testimony explaining that discrepancy?
Certainly, the architect took a further look at some details they had with measurements and everything and just refined their measurements. And as you'll see on the architectural plans here, they now have the existing ridge labeled with elevations of 74.94 feet. And then the average grade of 47.5 would be, you know, whatever that differential is. I can give it to you in a second. Is 28.44 existing height on the house with the existing grade. But a little clarification between existing grade on this structure versus the existing grade on the proposed structure, existing versus proposed, because existing grade we have here of 47.6, and that's because those grades are taken from around the existing structure. The average grade for the proposed structure is taking the average of the existing elevations around that entire proposed structure, including the additions. So you have the average grade of 47.5 versus 47.6. So it would be a 1/10 shorter, you know, even than that. So it'd be 28.34 approximately from the average grade to the ridge line. And the ridge of the house is going to go up that the 1.1 feet as testified to before.
Greg, I hate to confuse things, but the existing rear elevation and existing front elevations have the incorrect, it was in my letter, they actually have the incorrect average grade. Your plans are correct, your calculations are correct, your grading narrative is correct, but that actually says 47.6 and it should be 47.8 on both elevations.
Got it. Okay.
So I know you just highlighted it and testified to it, but it is 47.8 in accordance. with
47.8. Yeah. So then if it's 47.8, the existing structure then would be 4. 28.14 from average grade to ridge. But again, going back to the testimony provided earlier, the ridge heights are 1.1 feet difference in height. And I apologize for any dogs barking in the background right now if you guys can hear them. If no other questions, I think that wraps up my testimony.
Thank you very much. We'll reserve you for possible follow-up later on if you will be good enough to stay with us.
Absolutely.
So I would like very much then to call Ms. Gaffone to be resworn and give her testimony.
Evening, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Yes.
Can
could you
every-
give us- could
Can
you give us your
everyone
full-
hear? I think I see everyone nodding.
So if you give us your full name, spell your last, your address for the record, please.
Certainly, it's Christine Nazaro, Nazzaro. Cofone is CO, F as in Frank, ONE. Business address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey, 07701.
I'm going to swear you in. You do swear in testimony to give the board of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't think I was sworn last time. I don't think we actually got to the planning.
You-
test.
Oh, you may not have
You
been.
were not. You were not.
Since you were not, perhaps you could just very briefly give us some of your qualifications for the record.
Certainly. Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. For the record, my name is Christine Nazaro Cofone, and I've been testifying as a professional planner in the state of New Jersey for the past 27 years. I have been qualified here in the borough, as well as in excess of 400 and something or so other planning and zoning boards throughout the state. Like Mr. Dominowski, I have recently renewed my licenses, so they are current and valid for at least another 2 years since I just sent that paperwork in. So they are current and valid. I teach planning and zoning courses for the Rutgers Center for Government Services to board members such as yourselves. I am also an affordable housing special master, where I sit for about 24 municipalities as affordable housing special master. My firm does some municipal planning. We were the planners in Seabright for a while. We do the Casino Redevelopment Authority in Atlantic City. We were the appointed planner down there. But by and large, my practice is representing developers before planning and zoning boards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does any member of the board have questions relative to Ms. Cofone's qualifications?
No, her qualifications are fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cofone, you've heard the testimony of Mr. Domalewski. Would you care to give us your opinion as to the substance of his testimony and how you believe the board should take that into account when considering whether the variances which are being requested should be granted by the board?
Certainly, of course. So I heard all of his testimony this evening, as well as the last time this application was before the board. While I did not testify, I was certainly virtually present at the hearing and heard all of the testimony. So the reason we are seeking a D variance before this board is because we are seeking what's called a D4 variance for the excess floor area ratio. And we need a floor area ratio variance of 0.38 where 0.35 is permitted, and that's a difference of 265 feet. So that's what we're talking about, 265 feet. But to me, it's very important that the controlling HFAR, that's the habitable floor area ratio. Now that's a C variance. So what that is that sets a cap of 3,020 feet. So no matter if you had a lot that was 10 acres in this R75 zone, if you had some anomaly outlier lot, you could still only build a home of 3,020 square feet, because that's the max governance of the footage that you can have under your maximum under your habitable floor area, not the ratio, but the habitable floor area. So there are two different standards. The first is the D variance, the FAR of 0.38, because that is the one that regulates the size of the property that you can have, the size of the home versus the size of the property. And that's where that 2,848 number that Mr. Von Arx referenced before that raised some confusion. Because when we apply that conforming 0.35 to our property, we come up with 2,848 square feet. So that is how we arrived at that. So therefore, we do need those two variances, which to me is really essentially the substantive variances that's being sought in conjunction with this application. You did hear earlier, Mr. Chairman Leader asked us to go through the variances that were required, and we need a lot depth variance. That's 100 versus 91.5. That's an existing nonconformity. Even if Mr. Nick were to demolish the structure on the house and come up with a completely conforming application, he would still need to seek a variance for that because it's an existing condition. So We're also seeking, as we said, the front yard setback. And I thought Mr. Dominowski did a great job of walking us through what exists today for the front yard is a structure that has no front porch really, but front steps that sort of face to the front of the house that encroach into that front yard to 16.5 feet. The main dwelling sits 20 feet off the front yard setback, which is what we're proposing. We are proposing, however, a covered porch that will be 16.4 feet in the front yard setback. So that is a little bit of a change there. I would say that we do need to request that because it is a change. It's a little bit different feel of steps versus the covered front porch. We're also seeking the variance, the C variance for the number of stories. That's an existing condition on the property today. And we're asking for the variance for the side yard setback, 5.5 feet to our common property line with the Fisk Chapel, which is our property line to the north. So that's the variance relief. And here, I feel as though this application is a little bit hamstrung in that we're trying not to demolish the existing house, but it's certainly causing us a lot of challenges to come into conformance, at least somewhat so, with what the ordinance envisions. And the reason I say that is because when you look at the first and second floors, and Mr. Dominowski went through this as well, the first floor that we're proposing is 1,193 square feet. The second floor is 1,182 square feet. So that gets you to a first and second floor space of 2,375. When you add our basement in, we come up with 738 additional square feet, which puts us over at 3,020. It puts us 93 square feet over the requirement. And he also walked us through what is going into that habitable floor area. So we do have on our third floor, we have 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. I would say that that is quite consistent with the prevailing market demands for what we see in the area for homes. I don't think 3 bedrooms upstairs is particularly monster home-like or out of character with what we're seeing developed in the borough. The first floor has a nice mudroom feature, which, as we know, is a wonderful feature to add to when we see our properties either demolished and rebuilt. These are some of the amenities that the modern homeowner is looking for. So I think, what we have to do as planners is we have to balance these things, and we have to come up with a way to address what really was raised in the 2015 master plan, which gets to the heart of this application. One of the major problems and objectives cited in that 2000 master plan was infill development within existing neighborhoods was resulting in tear downs and expansions of existing buildings, that the existing character of the neighborhood was being impacted. So you obviously, as board members, have a tough job. The master plan also goes on to talk about enhancing and protecting existing neighborhoods. So by enhancing, of course, we want to take those structures that might be a little bit tired or not consistent with modern standards and bring them up to such a standard that they are enhanced and contributing to the vibrancy of the neighborhood. And I think the applicant, in my opinion, has done a yeoman's job of really trying to listen to the board and make modifications. I think we made a lot of plan modifications or a lot of great suggestions last month, particularly with regard to the windows and the garage, that we reoriented the house to make it more palatable. You heard a representation from Mr. Nick this evening that the materials that you see before you are exactly what he intends to build here. He wants this to be a high-end, attractive home that is going to contribute to the quality and the curb appeal of the homes along Cedar Avenue. One of the things that we presented or Mr. Dominowski presented last time we were together was the aerial exhibit of the subject property. And I'm sure this board well knows this area. You know that we are one lot over from a commercial property, the commercial insurance agency. You know, this is sort of like a transition lot where you have the commercial buildings, you have the Fisk Chapel, then you have our subject property, and then of course you get more residential as you have the corner lot at Cedar and Fisk. Directly across the street from us, you have a series of 3 homes that, in my opinion, appear to have a setback of about 10 feet from the street line. So we are certainly, in my opinion, in line with the fabric of this neighborhood. When you get to the corner of Parker and Cedar, there is a structure on that corner that sits almost exactly on the property line. So in telling you all this, I think it's important because the master plan also talked about, and it specifically talked about looking at how we regulate front yard setback in the zones. And it made a suggestion at possibly, rather than just having a standard, look at the prevailing setbacks in the area. And that's a very common planning tool. So when you're dealing with a D variance like we are, it's not like other D variances where the board has to evaluate particular suitability. When you're of the site and the Medici reconciliation, whereas if the use was omitted from the zone, when you're dealing with a D variance for FAR, the excess FAR, the test that we go through as planners is, can the site support the excess FAR? That's what we are looking at. And two things that I want to point out in my review and my conclusions of that is that what we look at as planners is, okay, when you're trying to determine here if the site can support the excess FAR, when you look at what is the building coverage permitted in the R75 zone, it's 35%, and that's what's allowable. We are at 21.5. What is the maximum impervious lot coverage? We are at 40, which is permitted to be 45%, and we're at 36.6. So this is not a situation where we are blowing out our coverages on the property and we are violative of, or creating new situations where we're violative of all the setbacks. So I think the board can certainly take notice of those coverages. Again, 35 is permissible for building coverage. We're at 21.5. 45 is permissible for total lot coverage. We're at 36.6. Even with creating that side entry garage, which this board knows creates more impervious coverage when you do that. The trade-off is that, yes, it does look a little bit better and increases the curb appeal. Now, so that's the test. Can the site handle the excess FAR? Also in 2015, the borough did a survey, and this was reflected in your master plan. And one of the greatest things that residents said a concern was for parking. We are providing adequate parking on the property, and we're doing so behind the front yard setback line. So that's an appropriate thing, I think, for us also to take notice of when we're evaluating as planners, can the site handle the excess FAR? We are not in a situation here where we're creating a number of bedrooms and we don't have enough parking on site to meet the demands for the site. So I think that, in my opinion, as far as the D variance for FAR, I am quite comfortable that the site can handle the excess FAR. Now, earlier this evening, I thought there were some good points that were raised that I think we can consider in the negative criteria. Chairman Lader asked specifically about the rear impression of the home. And I think that that is somewhere that gives us some opportunity. And I think we came up with, in my opinion, some great suggestions tonight that if they were imposed as conditions of approval, specifically working to bury that exposed foundation a little bit, adding stone to that foundation, adding plantings. All of those things, in my opinion, are things that can go to the negative criteria. Unless we forget, when we're evaluating Mr. Nick's application or any other application, the test in the land use law is not that there be no detriment, just that we balance that and the benefits of the grant of the variance outweigh the detriment. And I think this is a situation where we can improve this structure, improve the curb appeal, create a greater screening buffer from our property to the Fisk Chapel to the north. And I think that certainly the board can impose enough reasonable conditions on this with respect to the architecture and some of the other things that we talked about, the board and batten siding, standing seam metal roof, burying the foundation, and the additional landscaping and the stone. All of those things, in my opinion, speak to the negative criteria and the ability to impact the public good without having any substantial detriment on the borough's zone plan. And the thing that I want to get back to again is that if this house were to be demolished, Mr. Nick would be well within his right to build a structure with a first and second level of 3,020 square feet. The first and second floor of this home are a modest 2,375 square feet with 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms upstairs, a nice open floor plan and a mudroom on the first floor, and then a usable area for the basement. Mr. Leader also asked me to comment on whether I think the utility room should be in the habitable floor area ratio. And we're talking about 132 square feet. So if we include the utility room, it would be 132 square feet. And the definition of habitable floor area is the sum of the gross horizontal area of all the stories and half stories of a building as measured from the exterior face of exterior building walls or from the center line of wall separating 2 buildings. In residential buildings, garage, attics, and cellars shall not be calculated as habitable floor area. For a new dwelling, 50% of the attached garage shall be calculated as habitable floor area. So I think the applicant could certainly exclude the utility area. It is not something that, in my opinion, is creating any.
I'm sorry, why?
Because it's not something, in my opinion, that is contributing to the intensity, and it is not.
But it's not in that definition, is it?
It's not.
You just read the definition, where in there was utility room.
It doesn't say utility room.
Doesn't, okay, thank you.
It doesn't. So it doesn't say, it says of all the sort of a building measured from the exterior face and building walls. So to the extent that, you know, what are the walls around that utility area? And it also allows you to exclude such things as the garage. It allows for a new dwelling to allow 50% of the area of the attached garage to not be calculated. So, and again, it's only 132 square feet and it's not particularly visible from the street line. So I'm not sure that calculating it one way or the other has a material impact on how, when somebody drives by this home on Cedar Avenue, if you count or don't count that utility area, I don't think it's going to have a dramatic difference on how this home is perceived from the area. And I think when you look at the fact that the applicant could actually demolish the property and put up a conforming and larger home, you have to ask yourself, what are we doing here when we're unpacking these zoning requirements? Are we splitting hairs just for the sake of unpacking ordinances? Because he could demolish this house and put up something much larger than what he has pending before the board this evening. And I think as planners, that's what we really have to get to. That's the heart of these cases. How is this structure going to look as it sits to the other structures in the area? What does the zoning call for in this area? A 3,020 square foot home is permissible in this area. So Mr. Nick could certainly demolish the property and not have demolish the structure, not have a basement, and put up a much bigger conforming home. And I think, you know, we're constantly balancing these things as looking at the character of the area and perhaps encouraging not all the structures to be torn down, but some to be rehabilitated. So that's my opinion. You know, I don't know, we maybe will respectfully have to agree to disagree on some things, but I think when you have a situation where you could demolish the structure entirely and build something much bigger than what's pending, I think.
The floor area ratio less than the cap in this instance, though?
I don't understand your question.
The allowable floor area ratio, the habitable floor area under the allowable floor area ratio property is less than that.
Mr. Chiavetti, is this?
Al, you've got a bad connection. I'll handle it because I know the issue. Ms. Cafone, you've said a number of times now that we can demolish the home and build 33,020.
3,020.
But the 35% floor area ratio limitation would actually limit the home to 2848.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And did you finish? I don't want to start asking questions until you're done.
No, I just, you know, I'll speak to that as well, because which is still larger than the first and second floor than we're proposing. The first and second floor are at 2,375. So I think the board can certainly, again, find that the site can handle the excess FAR. I think if you look at criteria E, an appropriate population density, the bedrooms, I think, are consistent with what you would see for either a demolished or a new structure. If you include that bedroom in the basement, you're only talking about 4 bedrooms in this house. I don't think that that's out of character or inconsistent with the homes that we're seeing built and developed in the area. So certainly I would like to see this application approved. I think we meet our burden of proof for the grant of the variances. And I think it really would improve the curb appeal of the structure as it sits on Cedar Avenue. And I think it would allow for an upgrade to the structure. The home across the street, right across from the subject property, 32 Cedar Avenue, has been improved lately. It has a front porch on it. So I think that this is a really attractive and well-designed structure that's certainly consistent with, in my opinion, the high quality architecture and homes that the borough demands.
Okay. Ms. Caphone, with regard to the utility room, we kind of read the definition and then I think I got lost in what you were saying. I recognize that whether it's counted or it's not counted, you're not going to know from the outside. But are you arguing that the calculation of square footage is correct based on the Fairhaven definitions?
Yes, that our calculations are correct.
All right. Can you help us understand how you get there, please? Because as you read the definition, I agree with Al. I didn't hear an exclusion for utility rooms. I thought it was exterior wall to exterior wall. There's no exclusion that I'm aware of, and I think we should be able to agree on that.
Okay, so let me, hold on. If you bear with me here for 1 minute. So again, Mr. Laird, there's really, it's up to interpretation as to whether that utility area has to be into the calculation. And I think in my opinion, it gets to the usable area of the floor area. So, and I agree, your ordinance doesn't say to exclude it. It does not.
I think you can argue that it doesn't matter, but I'd prefer that we not argue about what the definitions say, because I'm not aware of an alternative argument. And if there is one that it should not be included, I'm happy to hear it. Otherwise, I think we should agree as what the square footage is of the proposed structure.
So if you include it, it's an additional 132 square feet, which would increase our FAR. Hold on, I can't do that math so quickly. So it would go from 3113 to 132 to 3,245.
I'm not pushing to include it. I'm pushing to understand any argument that it shouldn't be included. And if there's an argument, I'm all ears.
Yeah, this is Greg Domolewski jumping back in real quick. And where that came from was in the definition, in your ordinance through definitions, there's a section here that lists the habitable floor area ratio. And it says the habitable floor area compared to the total area of the lot with which it is cited. And then habitable room, it says any room within a building used for the purpose of sleeping, eating, preparation of food, offices, selling of merchandise, public gatherings, or assembly lobbies. All habitable rooms within a dwelling unit shall have natural light, ventilation, and heat. Within a dwelling, garages, porches, cellars, and utility rooms are not considered to be habitable rooms. That's where the confusion arose from, but we're happy to interpret, however you guys prefer. But the fact of the matter is, as Christine said, it doesn't change the overall, house. The house is proposed as proposed. If we want to count that towards the habitable, towards the floor area ratio and the square footage, we're happy to. It doesn't change the fact that the house is what it is, especially on that first and second floor in that basement. That area is not going to be used for, somebody living there or anything like that. It's going to be the utilities of the house. We're happy to include it or exclude it, however you guys prefer. But we're asking to build the house as designed.
Okay. So,
I was just gonna say, acknowledging with that being said, though, Mr. Leader, you are correct. The habitable floor area definition does not give you guidance, but your master plan actually speaks to the fact that it is confusing in the ordinance with the definitions. And there are, loopholes. It actually uses the word for new construction. So I hate to see my client penalized for not tearing the structure down and trying to come up and be sensitive to the concerns and questions raised by the board, when I agree with you, the habitable floor area doesn't give you direct guidance on whether to include it or to not include it. So I try to then unpack that as a planner, a practicing planner for 27 years, and say, okay, well, why do we write these things into the code? Forget about what it says. What are we doing as planners when we regulate habitable floor area? We're trying to regulate the intensity and how the property is used, how it's functioning as it relates to other structures. So that is how I can certainly come to the conclusion that it's appropriate to exclude a utility room from a habitable floor area.
I think that you can argue that it's appropriate and that you think that it's better than an alternative, but I've yet to hear an argument that I understand that it shouldn't be included in the number. I don't think we want to spend any more time with it. The next question I just want to clarify, because you mentioned it several times. If you were to tear this house down and start over again, how big can it be?
2,848 square feet, which
Okay.
is almost 500 square feet bigger than the first and second floors that Mr. Nick is proposing.
But are you arguing that the calculation's incorrect, at 31, 32, or whatever it's calculated at when this is a basement?
I'm not arguing that it's incorrect, no.
So what's the relevance of comparing it to what the first and second floor would be of a new structure?
Because that's what you primarily see from most of the vantage points of this home, other than the elevation that you pointed out earlier. Like I said in the back, I thought there was a great point that you made, that, okay, for most of the elevations of this house, it appears only like a two-story home. When you get to the back, we have the larger exposed foundation. And I thought there were some great suggestions made as to impose on that I thought would speak to the negative criteria. So that's the point in telling you that, is that for most of the structure, you really only see or feel the first and second floor of this home, which is a modest 2,375 square feet.
Okay. So, I don't usually feel this way, but I do see that this is a very difficult site to work with. And I'm not sure that I agree with the conclusion that working around this structure is better than the alternative, although certainly that's not my choice. I want to talk to you about the front yard setback. I pulled this up on Google, and I think most of the board members are familiar, but the three houses, the four buildings across the street, there's only four, they're all considerably closer to the street. What's the relevance of their distance from the street, across the street, to what the conditions are on your side of the street?
So they're far more non-conforming than what we are proposing. There are the structures, based on my measurement from being out there, they look to be about 10 feet or so from the property line. 32 looks to me like it was recently upgraded in some ways. It has a porch. So I think that we're actually more conforming, and by adding that porch and bringing the structure a little closer to the street line, it actually makes it more consistent with this portion of Cedar Avenue. So
is that more important than what the front yard setback is on the structures to the left and the right of this house on the same side of the street?
Well, there are no, to the right and the left on this side of the street, you've got the Fisk Chapel. If you're standing on Cedar, we have the Fisk Chapel if you're looking at the house, Fisk Chapel is to our left.
And what is that? And what is Fisk Chapel setback? Because no one's mentioned that number. And I'm curious, because it seems to me that it's set back further than what's proposed.
The chapel is set back further, and the home, there's a residential home on the corner of Fisk and Cedar. That's our other neighbor. So that home, it has a walkway from Cedar, but it has the garage, and the access to the parking to that actually comes off of Fisk. So what you see from that house to our immediate right, if you're standing on the subject property, is a two-story home, and it could be a 2.5 or 3-story, but it looks, like two residential structures like ours does when you're standing on Cedar. And then you have the walkway to that, and then you have sort of an open covered porch, and then that house gets its access from the driveway is off of Fisk. So the setbacks of that structure are consistent. If you looked on the aerial, that home sits almost on the property line. It looks very close to the property line, and the front yard setback looked to be certainly in line with what Mr. Nick is proposing.
You haven't measured it?
I have not measured it, you know, it looks,
So I'm looking at the Google Earth images, and it certainly seems to be set back considerably further than what we're looking at here. And I'm looking at the survey, which appears to show that structure, and it appears to show it at least 10 feet back. Can somebody look at that and tell me whether or not that's correct?
10 feet further back from the structure that Mr. Nick is proposing?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking at the Google Earth image as well, and it didn't appear to be set back 10 feet further than the structure that Mr. Nick is proposing.
So let's look at the survey, because the survey shows the structure on the adjacent property, and it appears to line up with the structure itself, the house, with the new addition, which would conform to the setback. And then there's a porch in front of that. But that's not what the setback is in the front of the house as it sits today, or the exacerbation to add the additional porch in front of that. And to me, look, the neighborhood's important, and you're correct in identifying that across the street, the 4 properties are closer, and I agree with that. I'm just not sure why that's more important than the houses on the left and the right on this side of the street, which this doesn't appear to line up with.
I didn't say that it was more important, but I think we have to consider, certainly you have to consider what's directly across from the subject property. And the property to our north is not a residential home, so it is set further back, but it's not used residentially.
Okay, so you mentioned the houses across the street. You didn't mention the ones that were non-conforming on our side of the street that are not lined up. That's the reason I'm asking. On floor area ratio, so if you were in an R10 zone, and we have a 10,000 square foot lot, our floor area ratio is 28%. And so while 3220 is the cap, you can only build 2,800 square feet. We're in R75, and your floor area ratio in this zone is 0.35, which is a lot, really big for an 8,000 square foot lot. And we're exceeding that by a lot. And I'm trying to understand where that isn't an issue. I recognize that because it's a basement and it's exposed, that this is a little different than a standard. But as I look at that same streetscape, right, on Google, what it shows is 3 cars that are sitting adjacent to the structure, if anybody wants to call it up. The roof of these 3 SUVs are just about at the first floor elevation of the existing structure, which I understand are going to remain. And so what I think is going to happen here is that we're going to dig out the area to create a garage underneath the house. And we're going to push all that right next to that other house. And I'm not sure how this is all going to work. And I kind of get back to the idea of, I recognize we're struggling with how to make this work. But I'm just wondering why it wouldn't be better to start over, because it seems to me that we've not talked a lot about the topography, but getting this underneath is going to be difficult. And I'm not sure how it's going to look.
I'd like to put on the record that we did look at the existing topography of the site. We are, not changing any grades along our property line, and we're entitled to regrade on our property. We're keeping all stormwater on our property, and we're not impacting surrounding properties with our proposed improvements.
So I'm good with the idea, Greg, that you've got certain latitudes in what you build, but I think that what you're asking for is a 3,200 plus square foot house in a zone.
And I think important to remain in the conversation here. We agree with Jim Kennedy's assessment of the existing grade of the property, but I know on habitable floor area, you want to include the definitions as the zoning ordinance reads. And, we put on the record and through our testimony last time, that we abandoned the discussion about how the existing grade is used in this case to measure the average grade of the building, which in turn makes us have a cellar versus a basement, which in turn makes that basement count towards our habitable floor area ratio. If it's used with the proposed grades around the structure, like we put on the record last time, we agreed to use your calculations the way Fairhaven always does it. And that's why we put it on the record with the 3,113 square feet. If you use the proposed grades around everything, that is not a basement, that is a cellar. It does not count into our floor area ratio or our habitable floor area. We agreed that we're using your calculations as Fairhaven always does, and we're calculated that way. But I just wanted it to be on the record that that's one of the reasons why we feel that this building and this house is suitable for this lot.
And your argument is that if you leave it as it is, it's a cellar, and because of the way that it's been calculated by our engineer, it becomes a basement, and it's just a matter of what you call it?
I don't want to rehash that discussion. We agreed to go with Jim Kennedy's assessment of the way Fairhaven always does it, which is using the existing grades on the lot around the proposed foundation, the proposed foundation limits. In this case, there's a substantial drop off right now from the existing foundation, and that grade drops off from the property. So you have elevation 47 and all these 46s and stuff that are counting around our proposed foundation, whereas grade's going to be higher on that foundation. But because Fairhaven always does it that way and counts it as, you know, use the existing grade on the site, which I understand, so you're not mounding up towards the center of your site and having this giant mound around a building to get it to count as a cellar versus a basement. And we've agreed to calculate it that way, and we have. And that's why we have this 3,113 square feet of floor area. But if that building were counted as a cellar, this is undersized compared to what we could have on that lot. We're under the floor area, and we're under the floor area ratio, going based upon the proposed grades around that basement. It would be considered a cellar if you were to use the proposed grades, as we put on the record previously. However, because we're using the existing grades, we're calculating that area, the average elevation around our foundation based on existing grades. And in this case, because our property is sunk down on the right-hand side, the grade drops off. And as you said before, you know, looking at those 3 SUVs from Google Earth, that grade drops off substantially from that house. We're using that grading that's out there today as part of our average grade calculation, ignoring the fact that it drops off on that side of the house and gets substantially lower than even at the house in the front yard. And that's what's putting us into this requirement for the floor area ratio waiver variance and the floor area variance to build this house. That is the crux of our entire application, is that calculation, which we agreed to.
I'm not sure I understand all your arguments, but I want to clarify something I said because I think I misstated it. You're not actually going to drop the grade to park a car in a new basement. You're actually going to be parking at grade. So you're actually going to be raising it up. So you're going to park at first floor elevation level, right?
Correct. It's going to be slightly lower than the first floor. Yes. It's going to be probably a little bit higher than where those cars are shown right now on Google Earth.
Okay.
But again, you know, going back to that conversation, that elevations, the elevations we're using to calculate our average grade is based upon the existing grade on the lot. And in this case, the grade does drop off on the right-hand side of the lot where that garage is going in essence, penalizing our average grade calculation, which drops us into the basement requirement and not a cellar.
As I look at your elevations, it looked to me like more than 50% of that basement cellar floor was outside of the soil. It's not sunken. It's not sunken in as you propose to finish it. Is that not representative of how it's going to look in the end?
No, I think the grading statement when we prepared was that, you know, more than 50% of that basement is underground. But I mean, you know, without having that calculation directly in front of me right now, I can't say. But again, we agreed to use Jim's calculation, so let's not lose track of that. That calculation penalizes us based upon the existing topography on the site, which drops off on that right-hand side, which is where most of that garage addition is added onto the house.
Okay, look, I don't want to, I have no interest, I don't know how everybody else feels, on catching anybody up on a technicality. And to the extent that this house is going to look like 2,000 square feet from the street and from all the views where the public are going to see it, I think that that's an argument. I'm actually struggling with whether or not the finished product is going to look right, given the issues that you're working around. And I'll acknowledge that you've removed a lot of variances that you came in with the first time, and you're staying away from that side. I don't know why you ever wanted to go in that direction, but you've clearly cleaned all that up, and that's certainly an improvement. And I am specifically interested in understanding from Mrs. Cofone through my back and forth with her as to how her testimony relates to what I'm seeing on the plans in relation to the front yard setback, in relation to how the square footage measures within the zone, and other elements of that testimony. But I'm good. And I thank you for clarifying where the calculations on the basement cellar issue may be creating a situation in the numbers that you don't expect to play out in the reality of how the house looks, if I've characterized your comments correctly.
That's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Anybody else for comments or questions, Mr. Cofone?
Chairman, I have a question, and I'm not sure if it's better suited for Ms. Cofone or Mr. Tomaszewski, but on page 2 of Elena's planning letter, I'm not sure if anybody could bring it up. I can certainly share it if you'd like me to.
What?
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd just like to walk through why this application that's in front of us now is an improvement over the previous application relative to the fact that we're actually worsened, to my interpretation, the floor area ratio, which if we're going to include the utility room is probably closer to 0.40. That's in number 4. And then also number 8. I realize number 8 is largely driven by the switch to the garage on the side. We also are increasing building coverage in number 9. And I'm sorry, back to number 4. We're obviously increasing the habitable floor area. So I just would like to hear, again, what's driving this and why this application is better than what was put in front of us before, with the realization that we did get rid of a few variances and that we're working with an existing structure. So thank you.
Okay, so I guess the question is why is this, do we think this is a better application than what we came with last month? And what's driving the additional floor? How did the floor area ratio increase? Is that your question?
Yeah, we took a step back, and I don't mean to say that too glibly, but we took a step back on some of these different parameters, and I just like to know why this is a better application and what's driving numbers that are worse.
So we did add the mudroom, so that was an addition from the last time we were together. So that created some additional floor area, and with moving, when you move things around on the property, we move the garage to the side, that created an opportunity to do a little bit of a different layout on the bottom floor, which I don't have to explain to this board. You see enough of these plans in new construction, you know that every home that is built, every new home that is built likely has a mudroom in it, and that's something that's very market sensitive and market driven. So we felt it was a nice addition to allow for the people who are going to live in this home are likely going to be a small or young family, and having a mudroom is a wonderful benefit and amenity for those for the people to use. And we felt like with the modifications that we made to the plan, truly we felt that we had addressed so many of the board's concerns that we heard through the introduction of the windows and the reconfiguration of other portions of the home. We thought that that was a balancing to address many of the planning concerns, and one that was done in such a way that again, I don't want to go through again the justifications and our perception as to that you're really only seeing or feeling from the area from most vantage points the first 2,375 square feet, the first 2 floors of this dwelling, which is under both what the zone allows overall and what we could build on this structure conforming, which is 2,848 square feet. So, it was to balance, Mr. Ryan, what the market demands and will bear for a home to balance bringing a home that fits with the curb appeal and the setbacks and the look and the feel on Cedar Avenue, and to try to come into conformance where we could with the zone requirements.
And also to build off of what Christina just said, also there was added a den on the first floor. And the reason for that is because, number one, to add the windows to the front of the house, you also have, if somebody's working from home, it gives them space. I was actually at a real estate conference this morning, and some of the developers there brought up a good point. They said, actually, since the work remote situation of COVID, people are actually now asking for 2 dens in their units and their buildings and houses. And that allows the husband and the wife to have separate workspaces, separate from the kids running around the house, dogs running around the house, whatever. But it gives them each separate spaces. This house has one den there, which would most likely be used by one of the parents working from home during the day, whatever. And it also puts eyes on the street of somebody, sitting in that den, in that window, where if something's happening on the street, somebody's walking by, whatever, you have eyes on the street there. And that was the benefit of adding that den to that first floor. And that also brought that habitable floor area up just slightly, after the elimination of that bedroom upstairs.
Greg, isn't it also true that you had a much larger garage in the last application, the last submittal? And
We
that the
did. We had a
garage-
two-car garage. We went down to a 1-car garage, correct?
And that larger garage was not included in habitable floor area because it's exempt by definition.
That's correct.
So when you go from a 500 or 480 foot garage to a 287 square foot garage, even though the structure is not getting much smaller or bigger, the habitable floor area has a pretty definite increase.
That's correct. Yep.
Greg, can you maybe pull up the floor plans that were presented at the last meeting in, I believe that was February or March? Because I know there's some changes, like the area where the mudroom is now proposed, that space wasn't proposed to have an addition there. Where the proposed garage and proposed den are, that whole area was proposed to be the attached garage. And then on the second floor, a bedroom was proposed over that existing one-story piece closest to Fish Chapel. Just to try to, compare what's proposed now to what was presented the last time.
Sure, I'll share it right
in terms
now.
of allowing the board to maybe understand where the habitable floor area moved around to.
You guys see my screen right now, or?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
And is the window moving around? I just want to make sure it's not highlighted as sharing. Is that the right screen?
We see the floor plan.
You see the floor plan, and it's dated 10/4/21. This is
Yep.
a Prestige.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure because the screen wasn't highlighted for some reason. So which floor you wanted, the ground floor or the first floor?
If you kind of walk through what was presented the
Okay.
last time, maybe even all of like the floors, each of the floor plans and also the elevations.
Sure. So this was this is the basement elevation. So as you see up front here, there was a mechanical utility room as well as the laundry room. So that laundry room got eliminated. This whole area became mechanical space or utility room, like we showed now.
Mr. Domlewski, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm not so sure this was marked last time. Do you have this, Sandy? I don't know that this was ever marked.
I'm going through right now to see which exhibit it is.
It should be, I think it was taken right from the website. Let me double check and make sure.
I agree. I don't think we marked it last time.
Okay. So we're gonna, what were we up to?
We're up to A9, so this will be A10.
All right, so A10 is the prior plan. Floor plans and elevations revised through October 20, 2021.
It was October 4th, 2021.
All right, that's A-10. Thank you.
Yep. So just on the basement elevation, the whole area underneath the existing structure remains the same as the basement. We did have the little addition off the back, which remains unchanged. And what you see on the right-hand side here is the old garage area that would have been, slab on grade, but that all got shifted back. So ignore this sort of this right-hand portion. Largely, the left-hand side remains unchanged, with the exception of removal of this laundry room and making this entire space the utility closet. Up on the first floor, we had the garage facing front. We had the living room, family room, and kitchen, which remains largely the same. And what happens now is this space here, this garage got cut from the 2-car to the 1-car. And what happened is we added this mudroom along the rear to allow access from this family room out to the garage, out to the driveway, without having to go right through the garage, and giving that laundry room and mudroom an entry as a nice feature to the back there. And then in front of the garage here, we added that the den or the office. But again, this whole area is slid back, so it's outside of the front yard setback for an attached garage. And then up on the second floor, again, we had a master bedroom up above the garage, along with the walk-in closet, the bathroom. Each bedroom had its own, the bedroom 4 and 3 shared the one bathroom with a Jack and Jill bathroom here. But again, this bedroom that was out over the kitchen was eliminated completely. So we took that entire wall, now goes straight across right here. And then this area that was above the garage all slid back, requiring the slight reconfiguration of the space to make these 3 bedrooms work.
So, it's funny, as you put these plans up, I generally favor not looking at the garage door. But your neighbor to the south is 2 feet off the property line. And as I look at your site plan, you've got just under 33 feet from the edge of the proposed garage to the property line. And effectively, that's 35 feet from their house. What was the motivation to turn the garage? Was it to create these other spaces? And was there any consideration of whether or not a side-facing garage is appropriate on a lot of this width, with the adjacent home being constructed that close to the property boundary?
It was the request of the board and the professionals to rotate that so you didn't see a garage from the front.
This board asked you to turn it?
Believe it or not, last year.
It's also to make sure that all the parking was provided behind the front yard setback line.
Well, there are other ways. There are other ways to do that. I don't remember specifically asking, but if we did, okay. So I'm sorry. The answer was that you've done it because we've asked you to.
Yeah, you or your professionals, yes. You being the board, yes.
If it was our professionals, can our professionals help me understand why this is better? Because as I look at the garage facing the street, my immediate reaction is that it works better on this site.
Included in my initial planning review letter, if the applicant had considered, in order to alleviate the required parking in the front yard setback, and also the number of spaces parking, if they considered a different layout for parking vehicles, and whether or not a side-facing garage had been considered. And my recollection is that I believe there were some board members who wanted to see the side-facing garage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if that's the answer, that's the answer. Marty, I think you'd asked the question of where we got the extra square footage, and I think we went all the way back to the original plans. Did you get the answer that you needed in understanding how we got here?
Yeah, I think this was helpful to go through the old set and kind of understand what was driving this. Whether or not we think this is a better alternative than this plan, I guess we'll discuss, but it's helpful to run through this and see it.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then at this time, if that's okay.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thank you.
Have we considered any way of not moving the bulk of this this home closer to the street? I mean, not only is it closer, but there's more bulk, closer to the road than there was before. The Fisk Chapel is set back, and basically by moving this forward, and adding more bulk, you're coming into the front yard of the Fisk Chapel. Has any thought been given not to increase the bulk of the front house towards the road?
We did that with the latest design, moving that entire garage wing that we're adding onto the structure towards the rear.
But I'm not talking about the garage wing. I'm talking about the porch in the front, which I believe the required setback is 30 feet. You are now, the existing is 20 feet. And you're not only coming 3.8 feet closer, but you're also adding more bulk to the front.
Yeah, I mean, we could eliminate the wraparound front porch. We thought it was a great feature to have for curb appeal on the building, as well as to break up that front facade of the existing structure there.
You know where it would go better is in front of the new den. Why doesn't it extend to the side?
You want to carry it straight across?
Well, no, I'm asking a question. I think that what Dr. Laufer is commenting on is that you've got more bulk in the front in the area where it's going to impact the streetscape of Fisk Chapel. And this board almost universally likes porches, but evaluates them across, the consequences of having them. And as I look at it, I'm just wondering why the porch doesn't extend to the right. Yes, that is what I'm asking. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm asking why it isn't designed that way.
It wasn't designed that way, mainly because the two entry doors, there's one entering in the center of the main facade there that sticks out towards Cedar Ave. And there's another door that enters into the kitchen area. So that was the reason and deciding factor of bringing those elevated areas up and not extending around the entire front area of the house. That's all. It has to do with door entry locations into the kitchen and into the front, main. There's a front door on the main facade centered in the front of the house. Architectural feature on the front of the house there. Because it's there today. That door is there today, both those doors.
And how much of the existing structure are you committing to preserve? Like we're really trying to make this work. Are you committing to maintaining all the framing, the existing floors? What are we locking into here?
Yeah, so it was under testimony last time from the architect that the roof is going to be removed, but the rest of the structure is going to remain.
Dr. Laufer, did you get your answer to your question?
I did, but I don't understand why you couldn't reorient the porch in front of the garage and then enter the adjacent room through a side door rather than compromising the front setback.
The reason why it's there right now is the front door is on the existing structure in the center of the house, and then we have that door off the kitchen. We can eliminate both of them, move the front porch into that area between, and do a side entry into that front foyer. We'll be happy to do that, and it'll pull the front porch out, and that front porch will be even with that front facade, that front wall at 20 feet.
How far back is that garage, what used to be the garage? How far back is that set from the existing front door? I know it's a setback. What is that about?
Give me 1 second and I'll give you an answer.
I'm sure I can see it on a plan, but I'm not that sure.
Yeah, I just gotta. So from that existing front wall, it's about almost 11 feet. Just about
So it's
11.
considerable.
Yeah, so that's why I think that area as a front porch makes a lot of sense. You'll have a staircase right off the driveway, right onto that front porch. And it sort of fills in that corner, and it'll keep that 20-foot setback. right across.
I tend to agree with Dr. Laufer. It's a big number to put, especially given the proximity to
Yep.
the Fish Chapel site.
And quite frankly, I don't think that was evaluated just because, the original design had that covered front porch and wraparound front porch in its existing location as proposed. So I don't even think that was great idea. And I think it definitely improves upon the front there. Thank you.
Mr. Von Arx, I think we're back to you.
I don't think that I can add very much to what has so succinctly been set forth by Mr. Domaleski and Mrs. Carfone. If you reduce this application to its essence, what you've got, it seems to me, is a proposal to build a very attractive house, which will be a benefit to the neighborhood, a benefit to the town, and on a site which is certainly able to accommodate it very comfortably. Reduced to its essence, that's really what we're talking about. You have a house that is reasonably designed, not a McMansion by any means, 3 bedrooms, very typical of a Fairhaven home these days. It is a vast improvement over what exists now. And I think it overall is a great benefit to the community. So I would urge you to take that practical approach to your decision and approving the application.
I want to clarify, there's 4 bedrooms.
I'm sorry, I take that back. I'm sorry. Four still would not be unusual in Fairhaven these days, that's for sure.
Okay, any board members have any questions of the applicant or their professionals before we go to the public? No? Okay. If any members of the public have any questions or comments with regard to the application, I'd ask you to use the raise your hand feature. We'll identify your raised hand, we'll bring you forward, and we'll give you an opportunity to speak. Going 2 times. Let the record reflect, no comments from the public. Anything further, Mr. Von Arx, before we close?
At this juncture, I would just like to really reiterate that you have an applicant here who is trying very, very hard to make this project work. He has made significant changes to what he originally was hoping to be able to build on this property. I think the result has come out really very much to his favor, and I think to the benefit of the neighborhood if you should approve this. And I would ask you to do so.
Mr. Kennedy, before we close the testimony and deliberate, can you help me understand, or can help everybody understand, how this site's going to look when it's done relative to the grading? Because I don't really have a full understanding of it. I think there's some question as to how much new dirt's coming in, what the final topography will be, and whether or not this is going to be disruptive to the properties around it. I'm sure you've looked at this closely. Can you help us understand?
Sure. Todd, so this property is in a hole. Okay, so that the house looks normal. When you stand on Cedar and look towards the home, the finished floor is above the elevation of the road like it should be. There's steps going up to the front. But as you look to the right of the house, the topography drops several feet, 3 feet. And it looks like it is in a hole. And unfortunately, as Mr. Domaleski said, this whole application and the relief being sought is in part due to the borough's ordinance that try and minimize the effects of mounding and building up a lot. In this case, it works actually against the applicant because they are not trying to build up the lot. They're just trying to make it level with the street and with the adjacent grades. In so doing, they are raising the elevation by about 3 feet. The easiest way to look at it is look at the garage floor elevation of about 50, the existing grade of 47. That 3-foot differential will actually make the lot look a little bit more normal because it will actually be graded towards, to the elevation of the road, to the sidewalk. The finished floor is above that, 3 feet above the garage floor elevation, and then the backyard resumes down to 47, 46, so another 3-foot drop. So in essence, they are pushing the existing building pad elevation to the right or to the south. They're extending that building pad elevation under the garage as well as through the driveway. So now what happens between this lot and the adjacent lot to the south? Well, they're creating a swale that will intercept water and bring the water back to the low area of the site, which happens to be the northeast corner of the lot. We had concerns before because that grading was really flat. So what they've done is now preserved the existing grades to the rear. That's the natural direction of flow from this lot. It flows towards the northeast behind, and so does Fisk Chapel. The property at Fisk Chapel drops down towards this property. A swale is being formed to the north of this house. And just like there's a swale to the north, there'll actually be a proposed swale to the south. And Todd, you did say something about, whether or not it makes sense to provide a side yard garage in this case. And I understand the need and the necessity to minimize parking in the front yard. I know for years there's been comments about snout houses and garages extending towards the front and requiring people to park in the front yard setback perpetually just to be able to park. In this case, this is one of those balance. It's definitely a balance because by providing the parking beyond the front yard setback, what you're doing is creating a tighter side yard to the south where they have to grade this swale to continue the water flow on the property. So to answer your question, will it look normal after the grading's done? Yeah, I think it will. I actually think that leveling off the building pad makes sense. The 3-foot swale that'll occur after the garage, really, after the driveway, that again is a balance. That is the give and take here for not providing parking in the front yard. That grading can be softened. I think Greg did say that they were open to providing some retaining walls if that would help around the corner, the southeast corner of the driveway. There is the potential also to drop the garage floor elevation slightly. And in doing so, that would actually drop the grading between the two homes. So there are some ways to finesse that grading, but it will look, you're filling in a hole. There's no other way to say it. Every time I go, I've been to the property 2 or 3 times. Of course, I walk by it or run by it all the time. But every time I'm out there, it just looks like something's missing to the south of the property. And this applicant is hurt by the anti-mounding idea behind the ordinance. There is no mounding that the applicant's doing, and yet they are penalized because they're lifting the grade to existing. So if we measured, like some towns, if we had measured building height from the crown of the road, or if we measured it from proposed grade or from some other level, to some extent, that they would not be in the situation they're in. But I mean, the realistic thing here, this is a walkout garage, a walkout basement. So this is a story. So in our ordinance, it's a half story. So, I mean, while from the front, it'll look like a 3.5 story. Actually, it'll look like a 2.5 story because of the grading. In the rear, it will be a full story that is visible, that basement floor. So again, this application is all about balance. I don't see a perfect situation in trying to keep the existing home and create the building and floor area that they're looking for that would conform to the ordinance. And I'm glad that that's your job and not mine. So that's from my standpoint, I think they're doing what they can with the grading to make it fit into the neighborhood and to not adversely impact adjacent properties with stormwater runoff.
And Jim, have we prevented them from creating a more level grade across the whole property by restricting their ability to change the topography materially because of the adjacent properties?
Well, I think it's the board has not. It's the existing conditions of this property. We have to tie, or they have to tie into the elevations on the north at Fisk, which drop down into their property. And then they have to tie into the elevations to their south and of course to the east as well. So that they really don't have, if they put a retaining wall along, the rear and southerly property lines, that's really the only way that they could make this one level building pad and provide drainage, towards either the street or towards the north. And I don't know that necessarily would be a great solution to this. So the penalty here is in the way the basement and cellar definitions work when you're trying to level a lot and not mound it, but just fill in a hole on the lot. As the building as that building footprint extends over the lower portions, the building actually gets higher, even though the ridge stays the same, because it's all measured from existing grade.
I had a question, Todd. I don't know who can answer it the best, but obviously Dr. Laffer brought up the site, the movement of the porch. Is that something that we can expect now? Is that settled, or is it?
They want it, yeah.
I get,
I can, pardon me for interrupting, but my client is motioning to me that yes, indeed, we would extend the porch.
I would say, Brooks, with the caveat that provided we keep the side garage access, because if you go back to the front garage access.
Of course, it wouldn't work.
Clearly.
It wouldn't be an extension. It would be a reciting of that porch. We would no longer be coming.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you.
So the proposal is it would be relocated to conform to the 20-foot front yard setback? Well,
Yeah,
what's the proposal? Go ahead, please. Go ahead, Mr. Domalucci.
Yeah, we would place the front porch. We would remove the wraparound front porch that's there now, remove the two front exterior entry doors, and then we'll fill in the area in front of the garage, in front of the den, I should say. And that will still maintain that 20-foot setback, which is to the front wall of the building, of the structure. And that front porch will be set back a minimum of 20 feet from the property line.
Yeah.
And that front porch will extend across the front of the den.
It's still an exacerbation of the existing nonconformity because they don't conform now. So.
Correct.
But but you'd meet the 20-foot setback then.
No, it's a 30-foot front yard setback.
30.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so you're gonna put it in the notch,
right,
to the right of the renovated foyer and in front of the proposed den.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
From that, I have one more question, and maybe Mrs. Confone can answer this. You mentioned those houses across the street. Are they all in the B2 R7.5 zone? I think part of that side of the street is R5, is it not? You're on mute.
Your question is, did the R75 zone extend across the street to the subject properties?
Yeah, I think part of that side of the street is R5.
I'll check and get an answer on that and get right back to you.
which would obviously have a reduced, I get it, they are very close to the street, but it would be a reduced front yard setback, not the 30 feet required.
Let me pull up the zoning map and I'll get right back.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, not to take a step backwards, but would it be possible for Mr. Domowski to sketch out what this porch is going to look like as contemplated? Where the steps are going to be?
Absolutely. Let me just share my screen again.
Mr. Chairman, just, I don't mean to interrupt, but you do have the other matter. Do you want to bring them up and see if they want to wait? Do you want to release them? Do you want to just continue as we are?
I don't have a great answer because I don't know how close to done we are. We can bring him up. We have Mr. Akins here. There he is. Thanks, Mike.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Can, Mr. Akins.
Good evening. Just checking in, we've been ready and, I know we're approaching 10 o'clock and traditionally the board and at the chair's direction, don't start new cases after 10, but we are ready.
So, Mr. Akins, here's where you are. I can't imagine we would finish you tonight. However, I certainly am open to the idea of holding our hearing open till maybe 10:30. I don't know where we are here or how quickly we'll be done. But what I would suggest is if you have something in particular that you think you could make use of tonight for, then we can hang in there. And if you want to hang in there, and we'll see where we go. I think if we get to 10:30, I think we're not going to make any sense to start with anything. But if we, if within 15 we're done here, we can get you on to start something. I'm not going to go beyond, 10:45-ish or so. I'll get shot.
Okay, we'd certainly wait another 15 minutes, Mr. Chairman. That's fine.
Mr. Akins, if at any point we're caught up in what we're doing and you disappear, we're going to assume that you're okay and you've made a decision to go forward. In anticipation of that, Mr. Irene, do we have any issues regarding time to act and need anything by way of an extension?
I'm going to assume we're well within the time. I don't think this application is that old, but if we're talking about carrying it, we can just get a stipulation from Mr. Akins at this time.
I'd certainly give that stipulation, Mr. Irene, and I'm not going to just disappear. I certainly will stay on. We've been on since a little bit before 7:15. So at a minimum, I would want the board's counsel to review the adequacy of my service, have the board take jurisdiction, so that we are deemed complete as far as that aspect is concerned.
You got it, Mr. Akins. No problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The leader, if I could just interject, we do have a number of discussions amongst the board administrative to handle tonight as well. So let's keep that in mind.
Thanks, Peter.
It looks, this is Christine, it looks to me like the R75 is on both sides of the street there, looking at the zoning map.
Okay. It looked a little odd to me. I looked at it earlier and it looked like half the street was B2 and the other half was R5, but.
I'm sorry. So the answer to the question of what's the zoning across the street on Cedar is what?
It looks to be R75 to me.
I don't know. It looks like half this, it looks like the R5 extends into that. No, maybe I'm reading it wrong.
I'm looking at a map and it looks like it is R5 and across the street is B2.
Thanks,
so
Paul. I'm not crazy.
That one corner, which is Cedar and Parker, I believe, that is R5, and
that's R5, right?
And that building looks like it was an old commercial building. It looks
It
like
was.
it was,
It's
an old
a
grocery
all
store.
white building that sits right on the corner there.
Yeah,
It used to be a store.
Hasn't changed in 45 years, as most of us know.
No.
Can we move Mr. Akins back to the gallery, please? Okay, so the answer is it's R5?
You can't tell. Half the block is in red that says B2, which is R75 for residential purposes. and the other half of the block is 10, which is R5.
The map I'm looking at has it as an R5, which is off of our website, the town's website, the map, the zoning map.
And our plans show it as R75. I agree, it's unclear.
Yeah.
But that one building though, on that corner is an old commercial building. We could all agree on that.
It's an old commercial building that sits almost on the property line, for sure.
Yeah, if we were in my hometown of Bayonne, it would have been an old tavern because that's on every corner.
Okay. We were wrapping up and I think we started talking about what that porch was going to look like. Mr. Domaleski, were you going to show us something?
Yeah, while you guys are talking, I so artfully and graciously sketch out the porch here. So I'll share my screen and you guys can take a look. So what you should see now is the area of the front porch we're going to remove that's in red. Do you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
And then the area of blue would be the front porch. And we certainly could trim that back, but that'll keep, this rectangle here sort of fills in the garage, the area in front of the den and between that front entry foyer and keeps the 20-foot setback from the street in that area in blue. And then the green stairs will be off to the right. And again, this was sketched up. I sketched this on the concept that would show that narrower driveway with a little more back out space from the garage.
So Exhibit A-11 is the marked up plot plan showing the proposed relocated front porch.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any more questions before we close? Okay, Mr. Von Arx, I just want to make sure that I understand what it is that we're being asked to vote on. The proposal is to remove the red and add the purple relative to the porch?
Correct.
Okay. I'm just going to ask one more time, just because there's been some new things that have been said, whether or not there's any members of the public that have any questions or comments. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. I'm only going to do it once, and then we're going to move quickly to discussion. Let the record reflect none. Okay, nothing further, Mr. Von Arx, right?
At the moment, no, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, but it's your last time to comment, so I'm going to ask that you not interject. If you have anything further in closing, I welcome it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, folks.
Wow. Okay, I'll start. As usual. I tend to agree with, I understand the numbers look really bad. But I do tend to agree that it is unique in the fact that if we're talking about a cellar and not a basement, we're not sitting here with this issue. For that reason and that reason alone, I think, especially moving the front porch away from the Fisk Chapel side of the structure, I tend to support the application for that reason. And really the numbers kind of mess with my head because it looks huge on paper, but from the street, I don't think it's going to be a detriment. It'll be, obviously anything is going to be an improvement there. And the way that Mr. Kennedy explained the grading helps me visualize it a little better. And I know that it's just you know, a fault of how it works out with the numbers and our ordinance. But
So Mr. Nashesi, just to make sure that we efficiently move through this, with regard to your support, the first thing that you mentioned, the condition that you mentioned is the rearrangement of the porch. That's in line with removal of the red, insertion of the purple. We also talked about a number of other things as we walked through, and I know that the applicant's professionals indicated a few things that they were willing to do. Is there anything else that was mentioned that would be part of your support, or do you not have any position on those other things?
I do not have a formal position on those other things. One thing I will mention, though, is we should, and I don't know, I don't recall if we did come to an agreement on the actual number. Are we including that space in the basement or not, the utility room? If we are, that's fine. We just have to get the number right.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. I changed over devices because I wanted to be able to say this. I think that our board has always been very diligent in trying to keep the integrity of how these numbers are calculated. And basing our decisions off of the hardships that are presented. So whether that additional space is counted or not, and the amount that you're over, shouldn't make a difference if the plan makes sense because of the topography there and because the place is in a hole. So I think that you need to cut out the conflation of the different definitions of habitable floor area and habitable room and habitable attic and all of that. Honestly represent the numbers as they're calculated by the ordinance, and then make your decision based on the circumstance, not the amount that it's over.
I don't think you're going to find any disagreement there. Does anybody care what that number is right now before they vote? I don't
just care that it's accurate.
I understand.
Agreed.
I don't think that there was an argument presented that it's accurate as stated. If you follow the argument, you could put the utility room on the first floor and it wouldn't count either. And this board obviously doesn't do that. So I think that there's not a problem conditioning anything on having that number calculated from exterior wall to exterior wall.
Okay.
And my only other comment was on the screening on the, I guess the left elevation side. Understanding that the grade drops down about 2 feet from where Fisk Chapel is. If you're putting in a 4-foot piece of landscaping, you're really only getting something that's 2 feet tall. And these things taper so much that you're really getting the least of the 2 feet out of that piece of landscaping. If you put a 6-foot bush or tree or something in there, you're starting out with 4 feet of screening instead of 6. So I don't know what anyone else's opinion is on the screening. I know someone had brought it up, had concerns about what was proposed initially, but I think that visually with that drop, that's something to consider if you're concerned about the screening.
So why don't we time out on that? Mr. Von Arx, I've noted that your microphone is not muted and I hear you talking, and I'm guessing that you're talking because you'd like to offer something up with regard to this issue.
Yes, yes, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, you're correct, Mr. Chairman. My client has just indicated to me that that obviously is an important point, and he's willing to put in 8-foot trees.
So I'm going to make a suggestion, and that would be that there be an investment in some additional material and it be designed as such that over time, what you wind up with is an actual vegetated barrier between these properties. I don't know whether the topography would lend itself to planting along the property line itself, maybe one on, one over. If you've proposed 6, 10 plantings, I would think they wouldn't have to be 8s necessarily, but if you doubled the amount of the material and planted it in a way that's designed so that in a few years it grows in and you get something nice, I think it would benefit both properties. I'm not a landscape architect.
My client has indicated to me that whatever it takes, we will agree to.
Okay. All right, Mr. Von Arx, I'm going to ask you to mute your microphone, and I thank you for jumping in on that important point.
Thank you for listening to me.
Mr. Chairman, I'll weigh in at this point. I think this is a very challenging lot. And I want to thank Mr. Kennedy for helping me understand what this lot is all about and some of the challenges that are presented by this lot. There's many cosmetic improvements that we've talked about, including the back left, the rear left portion, to do something to cosmetically improve that so that its appearance from the Fisk Chapel is more reasonable, and also the addition of the screening, of the evergreen screening. One thing that I might suggest is to bring that porch back an additional 2 feet from the front of the house and use that area for planting so that it further mitigates the appearance of a large mass along the front of the house. I think that would be a nice addition, but as such, I think we've made a lot of compromises and a lot of improvements, and I'm okay with it.
So I'm going to try and clarify the comment, Skip. With regard to mitigating the foundation, are you talking specifically about the proposal to put stone?
No, yes, the proposal to put stone, or, I mean, I'm not a design architect, so I just want something there other than a blank concrete wall.
Yeah,
and then
go ahead.
And then in terms of the front of the house, if the porch is parallel with the front side of the house, I think it would look better if you drop that porch back a couple feet, put some planting in front, and I think that would mitigate the look of the front as well.
So I just want to address these separately, and I want to go to Mr. Von Arx and make sure that we're not misunderstanding what the applicants agreed to do. And I want to qualify what I'm saying, because I'm not sure that these things are going to impact how I can vote on this application, but it may affect the rest of you. And so I think it's important that we tease it out. So with regard to the foundation, are you asking whether or not that stone, I'm sorry, you're asking for a mitigation technique. Mr. Von Arx, I'll go to you. I understood the applicant to suggest, or the applicant's professionals, that they be willing to landscape along that wall. I also understood another idea would have been to install stone veneer around the foundation, which I understood Ms. Cafone to agree. I was specifically concerned with the rear elevation.
My client's indicated to me that he's willing to do both and put a stone facade, the stone facing, and also landscape.
So the stone facing, Mr. Von Arx, can you be specific as to where that would go?
Anywhere there is a bare wall.
The foundation.
Along the foundation, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Von Arx. I'm going to ask you to mute again. Dr. Laufer, with regard to the porch, I just want to throw out there that a 10-foot porch is a very usable porch. By the time you install columns and railings, you're going to lose about 12 inches and you're going to wind up with about 9. If you reduce that to 8, you're going to put columns and railings, and you're going to be reduced to about 7. The difference is material. And I just want to make sure that that's considered if the idea is to push it back 2 feet.
I'm not set in stone on moving that back. I just thought it would be a nice addition. I like where the porch has been moved to, and I think that that satisfies at least my concern about pushing forward with bulk into the front yard.
So I think what's developing here is a process of understanding what the components of the adjustments would be in order to get to the point where we can go forward with a vote. Does anybody have comments with regard to the porch specifically, and Dr. Laufer's idea to consider pushing it back 2 feet from what was proposed, which is the purple in place of the red?
I do. I think the shallower you make that porch, the farther you push the front door of the house, which is going to be on the side of that front room, away from the corner and into the middle of whatever room that is. So I think that would just be a reason not to try and push that porch any farther back from the front face of the house.
Anybody else have an opinion one way or the other?
I agree with Al. I think you don't gain much out of it and you lose functionality. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Dr. Laffer, you're okay with that, right?
I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Let's take that issue off the table. Any other comments relative to what we're looking at? What we're trying to do is develop Peter's idea of a vote in favor. Was there any other thing that was discussed tonight that we want to talk about so that we understand what we're dealing with?
There was mention, Mr. Chairman, about some kind of deed restriction on, I think, the use of that space downstairs in the basement. Was that something we were going to memorialize?
So Mr. Irene likes to throw that in. I see Mr. Von Arx raising his hand. Go ahead, Mr. Von Arx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will certainly stipulate that there will be no kitchen in the lower level.
But what we're talking about is the potential for a deed restriction.
To restrict it.
Have we ever
Yes.
required or thought of or talked about a deed restriction with any property that has a walkout basement? I don't recall.
The floor is Mr. Von Arx because he raised.
Oh,
his-
I apologize, Mr. Arx.
Well, it's my feeling that if that is a condition of the resolution, that becomes part of the record for the property. And, you know, as a person who does a lot of real estate work, restrictions are something that are to be avoided if possible. And I would think that the board's concern would be certainly protected by a condition in the resolution. Moreover, your zoning ordinance does not allow that without a variance. So if somebody wanted to put a kitchen in the basement, they would have to come before you again to get permission.
The reason we do these, Mr. Chairman, when we do them, is when there is the possibility for a physical separation. And in this case, you have a direct exterior entrance to the basement that now has a bedroom and a bathroom in it. So if cooking facilities are added, and I'm not suggesting this applicant is going to do it, if cooking facilities are added, you have a functional separate dwelling unit. The problem is conditions are wonderful, but without COs and even sometimes with CO inspections, and I don't know if the borough requires a CO on the sale of a property, there's no way to put prospective purchasers on notice. And the case law even says that if you're going to impose restrictions such as these, when I say restrictions, conditions, you should reasonably put any successors and interests of the property on notice. And the way to do it is to record it in the property records so that anybody who does a search when they buy the property is going to pick up the restriction because the title company is going to call it out. So assuming for the moment that no one is going to convert that basement into a separate dwelling unit, there should be no problem with the restriction. My suggestion only, it's up to the board.
All right, Mr. Von Arx, but I'm tiring of this.
Mr. Chairman, my client will agree to a deed restriction.
All right, thank you, Mr. Von Arx. Mr. Von Arx jumped in prematurely. As a real estate attorney, I'm also adverse to this. Mr. Von Arx, please mute. Clouding title with a restriction is easy enough to do, and I understand that. And it could provide some clarification at some point in the future. The resolution itself is forgotten a number of years from now, and certainly won't be available 20 or 30 years from now if an issue comes up. Nevertheless, I think we need to weigh the pros and cons of recording it. And, you know, it's very easy to do, but it creates an irregularity in title, which can affect marketability. And I would just suggest to you that if you think it's important and it gets you to yes, then by all means, go ahead. But I would just suggest that it not be done lightly.
Can get to yes without it, Todd.
Okay.
I can just make one comment. We've never discussed this in any other, to my knowledge, any other walkout basement property that could technically be a separate exterior, to my knowledge anyhow.
I'm going to disagree with that. I think Mr. Irene's pretty consistent with inserting this idea when he sees something that can become separated. But I don't know that we've done it more than once, perhaps more, but certainly not a lot. And again, I don't think we should do it lightly. Does anybody have anything further? I'm going to ask that we go around before we actually make a motion to vote, because I'd like to make a couple of comments, but I just want to make sure that everybody's gotten an opportunity to sort of lean into Peter's idea of viewing this favorably.
Mr. Chairman, I had one question about the garage. I think Mr. Kennedy had mentioned that perhaps it'd be attractive to make that garage a little wider and a little more functional to get a car into it. And Ms. Gable also had asked for a little bit more of an aesthetically pleasing door. I'm not quite sure if we resolved the issue about the width, though.
All right, Mr. Von Ark, so I'm going to do it. I don't want to encourage argument, but I think that the idea was raised of making that garage door an aesthetic accent. And it was my understanding that that was broached and that that sounded agreeable to the applicant.
Yes, the garage door is not a problem. We would like to make it as attractive as possible.
Okay, and what about the width of that door, Mr. Von Ark? Has there been any discussion in your office there about the proposed width and the idea of making it wider?
At this juncture, we have not. Frankly, I don't know. Do you know?
We just lose some of the den.
You lose some of the den. Yeah. Well, Mr. Domaleski, maybe Mr. Domaleski can address this issue. It says whether there's sufficient room to comfortably park a car in this sized garage as now proposed, or whether more room is really required in order to make that work.
Yeah, I don't think that. I don't think that was the question. I think the question was whether or not a wider door would permit greater ability to actually park in the garage because it would improve your turning radius. My question for you would be whether or not a 10-foot door, an 11-foot door is even available. I don't know about the widths that are standard, but I don't think they make them of all sizes.
Just to interject really quick, the door is already shown as a 10-foot wide garage door, so it is oversized width.
Okay. So does that resolve it for the, I guess, John, did you raise that? I'm sorry, who raised that? Marty, you raised that?
Marty.
Yeah, I think it does, unless Mr. Kennedy wants to add to that. I think it's fine.
No, again, it's a wider door is going to give them better turning radius. 10 foot's better than 8 foot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does anybody else have anything else that we discussed?
Do you mean in terms of conditions, Mr. Chairman? Potential conditions?
Yeah, I mean, ideas that came up just to make sure that we've got them covered. Do you have something, Mr. Irene?
Well, there were the materials, right? Standing seam metal roof, board and batten siding, decorative garage door that Mr. Ryan just mentioned, stone. Originally, it was the exterior of the basement. Now I understand the proposal is for stone facing along the entire foundation as well as the exterior of the basement. And there was also the proposal for foundation plantings. There was discussion about the landscape screening that you proposed. The board may want to consider just making that the landscaping subject to review and approval by the board engineer, so you're not trying to design it here.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Any and all of the stipulations made by the applicant, although I think that's all of them, and compliance with Mr. Kennedy's report and Ms. Gable's report to the extent that they weren't otherwise modified during the proceedings.
So we normally go around and I get a sense of where people are based on kind of, how we do it. I think that I've gotten the sense from everybody. Does anybody feel as though they've got an opinion that they want to express before we vote? I want to express mine before we vote. I just don't want to. Elena, please.
Sorry, I said one thing. There was a quick discussion about the width of the driveway. I'm not sure where we ended up settling on that. There was the mock-up showing the 12-foot wide driveway and then the one showing the 16-foot driveway. And I don't recall where it fell, but I just wanted to find out if that should also be a condition of approval.
Yep, that's a good spot. There really are two proposals there. And the second proposal is to move the driveway effectively 4 feet to the right and widen the area at the outside of the garage door to a full 16 feet. Anybody feel one way or the other about that?
think if you have more area in front of the garage door, it's just going to make it that much more functional, Mr. Chairman. I think that's a better solution.
Do we know which plan that was?
Was it 16 or 20? What are the dimensions of that driveway?
It's 20 feet
The
behind the
drive-
driveway, behind the garage.
20 feet behind the garage, and then it clips to 16 in front of the structure?
No, he narrowed it down to 12.
12.
Was that shown on the same plan that the relocated porch was marked up on? Was that A-11?
I think that was marked draft, and he had indicated that that was a new exhibit. Is that right, Greg? He's nodding his head, yes. All right, does anybody not prefer that proposal with the wider driveway? All right, so I just want to thank the applicant. I think it's clear that he's really struggled. I think if you look at the history of this application, it goes way, way back. I mean, way, way back. And I recognize how he got into this situation based on what he said last time. And I feel for him, I really do. The problem I'm having with this project is that I am very afraid that it's not going to wind up looking very good in the end. I think there are a lot of variables here. I'm not caught up with the square footage, although I think we should have an honest number. I think that the movement of the porch was a terrific idea. I think it is the only reason I could see myself voting in favor of this. But I have a problem with how it all works out. It just feels a little forced together to me. I think in the end, the cost savings of holding on to this structure they're not immaterial, and it's not my money. But at the end of the day, you're left with something that I think may wind up being worse than if you'd started over. And I generally don't feel that way, but because it's shoved over to the one side and the way the garage lays out, and the problem with the basement versus just fixing the grade and really sinking the basement the way it should be and just kind of starting over, it just makes more sense to me. I'm troubled by some of the numbers, but I am certainly cognizant of the efforts to make it work. And I really am appreciative of the effort to do that. And I recognize that I can't support it, but I want to acknowledge that because I think that effort's been significant. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to it, if they're ready for Peter to make his motion. I think that we have got a long laundry list of conditions that we should make sure that we have straight before we actually vote. But I think we've covered all those things. I don't know that there's more discussion about those conditions. This is a D variance, guys, so we've got 7 voting members. We need 5 affirmative votes with regard to the D. So, Peter, you're going to make a motion?
Yeah, I'm gonna need Mike. I'm gonna need your help as always with this because there's a ton of things that I cannot keep straight in my head, but I will make a motion to approve the application with the conditions outlined in the discussion. I don't know how else to say it. I can't.
So I've got them, Mike, and I'll let you supplement what I have if you just check them against your list. The first is the exchange of the porch. So you're getting rid of the red and moving to the purple. The second is to recalculate the square footage to the exterior walls of the basement. The third is to condition the approval on the installation of stone veneer to the foundation on all sides of the house. The fourth is to condition in the resolution that there will be no kitchen on the basement level. Next is to create an architectural element with the garage door by way of creating an architectural door subject to whatever the applicant decides. The next issue is the landscape planting along Fifth Chapel, which I think the good idea was to submit that to the engineer. I think there's been discussion about larger plantings. 10 are proposed. There's discussion about larger plantings or additional plantings. But I think that the goal of the final design should be to create something that over time will create screening between this house and Fifth Chapel. We also wanted to condition it on the usage of the materials per the testimony, which would include metal roofs were indicated, board and batten siding. That's all I got.
Thank you, Tom.
Standing seam metal roof?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
Right, driveway as per, I guess that's exhibit A-9.
Yeah, that's the last thing. I missed that. Thanks.
Although the roof is being removed and replaced, otherwise maintaining the structure. any and all other stipulations, although I think we have them all. Compliance with Mr. Kennedy's report to the extent not otherwise modified during the proceedings. Likewise, Ms. Gable's report. And as I understand it, we are doing no cooking facilities, no separate dwelling unit in the basement, but the proposal is not to add a deed restriction. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
All right,
So I-
Mr. Chesney, that's your motion. Sounded really good. We need a second.
Second.
Mr. Kinsella. Roll call when you're ready, Sandy.
Mr. McChesney,
Yes.
Mr. Ridgway,
Yes,
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsella,
Yes.
Mr. Chiavetti,
Yes.
and Mr. Leader.
I'll abstain. Congratulations. You're on mute. You're finally on mute, Mr. Von Arx.
I wanted just to thank the board very much. This has been a long haul for my client, and he really appreciates the care that you put into this decision, and we certainly appreciate your approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domaleski. Nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get Mr. Akins up here. He's tired. Mr. Kennedy can go home, I think, right?
Okay.
Good night, Jim.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Take
Jim.
care.
Hey, Jim.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yep, we can hear you.
We're going to ask that the matter be carried to the June meeting and placed on the agenda as early as convenient. And if Mr. Irene could confirm that my notice by publication certified mail is adequate and the board may retain the matter jurisdictionally, please.
Yeah, the record will reflect that I've reviewed the notice materials. They're in order. The board has jurisdiction to hear and consider the matter.
Thank you.
Mr. Akins, thank you for your patience. Sandy, do we have anything on the calendar for June?
We have 2 completed applications that will be going on for June as well.
Have either one of them been advised to notice?
Nope.
Okay. Mr. Akins, are going to roll you to first position in June, okay?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Let's announce that date though, Mr. Chairman, just in case there's any interested parties, and we'll inquire also. So do we have that date, Sandy?
It's June 2nd.
So I assume, Mr. Chairman, that the motion is to carry the matter to June 2, 2022 without the necessity of renotice and with a stipulation from Mr. Akins extending time which the board has to act.
Yes, well assumed.
We get that stip, Mr. Akins?
No stipulated.
And I assume also, Mr. Chairman, while we're announcing it, that we are going to still be Zooming on June 2?
To be discussed, I think.
Yeah, so my suggestion is we discuss going back live. Maybe we want to do it starting with July so we can give everybody ample notice.
Noted.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, this is May meeting already. Oh, yeah, I'll agree with that, Mike.
Well, hold on, I lost track. I spaced out for like a second and I'm totally not tuned in. Are we now talking about this?
No, it's Mr.
No.
Irene brought up that he was going to mention that it would be, are we going to be live in June? I don't think it would be feasible if we were to discuss it, which we are going to discuss,
Okay,
given the timing that,
we're Zooming June.
yeah, we'll Zoom in June.
So for any interested parties, if there are any of the matters being carried, the Garrison Vitale matter, 946 River Road, is being carried to June 2, 2022 without the necessity of renotice. There'll be no further notice. Mark your calendar accordingly, and the proceedings will be conducted that date, same way as tonight via Zoom. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Akins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irene. Good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Mr. Akins.
Thank you.
All right, Peter, you got some admin to run through?
We do. First discussion, email addresses for board members. Do we have any other information on this at all?
So here's where we are, Mike. The borough is telling us it's $100 an email address. That's created a stick in someone's craw. I actually think it's a lot of money to spend. A question was raised as to why don't we just do Fairhaven Zoning Board, Neshesny@gmail.com. And a comment was passed through the business administrator that was not a great solution. But I question how that can't be better than using private emails. Do you have any comments with regard to that?
I suppose it's better than using private emails. Did anyone have a chance to contact over? The one that comes to mind is West Long Branch, where they have separate ones, and find out what they're charged. Is it $100 per? Do we know?
Yes, it is.
Really?
Yep, I can't, I can't think of the woman's name that I spoke with her now months ago. Jennifer.
Jennifer O'Sullivan.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay.
Elena, I'm just seeing you there in the middle of our screen. I don't think we have anything further for you if you've got better things to do at 10:33 in the evening.
Not really, to tell you the truth. I'm already here with you guys, so I can stick it out till the end.
Okay.
Not a problem.
She's a trooper.
Yeah.
So,
I've
yeah,
been
Mr. Chairman, the short answer to your question is I suppose it's better to have some separation than none.
Great. I kind of feel the same way, and I think that this project then becomes somebody trying to figure out an email address for Gmail that would be available for both the planning and the zoning board. We would do it uniformly. Every member would set up their own account. It would have to be unique enough that we're not going to wind up losing names, but I can't imagine how we wouldn't. That would be a pretty random coincidence, right? So Peter,
if someone's going to put together a naming convention and get Gmail accounts, then I'll switch over to that. If that's not going to be done, then I'm going to change the email address that I request that you guys contact me by for board matters.
Okay, so Al, you want to be in charge of selecting naming conventions and provide us with 3 alternatives?
No.
Got it.
You know who looks really ripe to do this? Drew looks ripe to do this. Drew, when you're not campaigning, could you do this?
Fine.
All right, so Drew, here's your charge: to deliver to us 3 different ideas in terms of how we could set up Gmail addresses that include our names. The planning board would be a part of it too, so just think about how to lay it out that way. And then we'll wind up voting and deciding whether you have good ideas, and then we'll pick one across the boards and we'll go with it.
Do you want this for June? Do you want ahead of time to have discussion in email? What's your preference?
Tomorrow morning. Oh, sorry.
What's that?
I said tomorrow morning.
And there is no discussion in email.
Well, yeah.
All right.
Screw that. I mean, no, I mean, Drew, if you come up with them and you send them around to the zoning board, I think that we could decide via email what we all like. It'll become clear, and then I'll circulate it to the planning board, and we'll go with it. So, whenever you can come up with it, but I think it's important that you test it, right, to make sure it's available before you give us one and we wind up with 27 problems.
Copy that. Yep, I'll check the naming convention. Mike, I do have one question, right? So when it comes to password management, when it comes to various cybersecurity aspects,
I'm thinking of donating the $900 to get everybody their own. But I'm sorry, Drew. I just see how complicated this is going to get. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, right? So we're doing this in a group setting, and are there going to be any policies that we have to abide by specific to these email addresses?
Yeah,
that the town would set.
This would be
the volunteer thing that they sent out a month or 2 ago, I guess.
Well, and I think the thing is you use it only for the Fairhaven board business and nothing else. Because then you're going to open the door once again if you use it for something other than Fairhaven board business.
No, understood, right? So here's the scenario, right? We use it for Fairhaven, business, and someone doesn't take password setting seriously and their account gets compromised and gets hacked or gets, whatever, right? So are there any policies, procedures that need to be put in place specific to this, or is it volunteer and it's up to discretion of the individual?
I think it's just gonna be another personal email account,
Yeah.
but it's
Okay.
gonna be named something similar to, FHZB member.
It's no
Steve Eddie,
different from
something
what
like
we
that.
have today, and the information that you'll be getting by email also is available on the borough's website. So I don't suggest anybody exchange social security numbers. But by the way, Drew's in the business of cybersecurity, in case you can't tell.
Copy that. I'll do some more diligence too, and I'll get back to you guys.
Well, not to complicate things, but Fairhaven zoning last name at Gmail is available, at least for me.
There you go.
So there
I
you
may
go.
have a problem.
That's my suggestion.
I think
I'm
Paul
helping.
just scooped Drew. I mean, geez.
Look at you.
I was going to volunteer, but since he has a background in security, I'm glad I kept my mouth shut.
All right, fantastic. You guys can set a meeting and sit down and talk about it and let us know what you come up with.
Paul, I'll reach out to you.
Please do.
What's next?
I'm going to table the RFP discussion, I guess, for another month for a planner. We don't need to go through that now.
Well, I would suggest to you that we go into close and we can talk about it. Planning
I
board.
know, I just want to avoid going into closed because it's a pain in the butt.
Oh, okay.
Because we don't have a phone thing set up or anything. We'll do it in June. It's too late for this.
Okay.
Moving on. Minutes for the April 7th. Sandy, we don't have minutes from April 7th, do we?
You do not.
Okay, then we will have nothing to approve. We'll have many, many minutes to approve in June.
So that'll be carried until June.
Yeah. Land use committee memo. Mr. High Exalted Ruler, do you have any comments on this, or do we have anything to discuss?
Peter, why don't you tell everybody what the good work we're doing?
So we're doing fantastic work. We'd had a joint subcommittee meeting with members of the planning board and night before last. And we are going to be submitting 2 proposals to council. Mr. Irene is writing them up as we speak, I think. And we're going to be proposing limitations. The first ones are on prevailing front yard setbacks to be more cohesive with the prevailing neighborhood setback. Going to be, I think we came up with 200 feet either side of the house. So you'll get the greater of the prevailing neighborhood setback or the ordinance front yard setback. That was the first one. The second one we've come up with, and to address the major problem that we've seen in neighborhoods about first floor elevations way out of the ground with 9 and 10-foot basements and 5 steps up where there used to be 1 or 2. We are going to limit the first floor elevation, irrespective of the ridge height, to 24 inches above the existing grade. We had another one there too, right? Todd, what was the other measurement?
Wanted to tie it also to the curb. Tie them together as a point of reference.
How did we word that, Mr. Irene? I don't recall.
It's not been worded yet. Peter's a little bit over his skis. What we've actually done is talked about this. We're going to write it up. Then we're going to submit it to the planning board. The planning board's going to discuss it in public and consider whether they can recommend it. Then it'll get sent to council. Then it'll be discussed by the public again. And if they agree with it and elect to adopt it, they will actually draft the ordinances.
Oh,
But
I got it wrong. I thought it went to
Peter
council.
feels good about our chances.
I do. We do all that work for nothing.
Yeah.
So that's where we are with the land use committee at the moment. There are a couple of other things that we need to discuss, one of which is floor area, but we figured 2 was good to start with. That's a bigger discussion.
And the last bit is that there's a discussion about how to clarify the measurement of floor area, removal of the word habitable, and make it simple so that it's uniformly applied.
Yeah.
In the works.
In the works. And I thank everybody that serves on the committee. Dr. Laufer, thank you so much for your help with this. In-person meetings. I'll lead off with this, and I think we need to discuss this and figure something out tonight. I personally don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't be moving to go back to in-person meetings, given that council's been doing it for quite some time. I don't know the possibility of us using the OWL system that they use, so we can be more reaching to members of the public that choose to look at it online. But if we can use the same thing they are using, then I don't see an issue with it.
To do what?
to move back to in-person, and you watch council meeting, or I do, where I watch them online, but they're in person. I think it works quite well. They can see members of the public speaking, you can view exhibits. I mean, obviously you can't view exhibits put on the board, but when somebody's in person, you can still see it just as if you were there.
But just so I'm clear, if you want to do it, you're doing it only to broadcast it, like people are watching on television, right? You're not going to allow interested parties to zoom in from that system, I assume. Because that creates a whole other host of problems.
Council allows Zoom, and
council's not conducting hearings. That's the only thing I just want to understand and be clear. There are some towns that are live and they broadcast the board. I'm talking live on the board, and they broadcast the board proceedings so you can watch them on television if you want. But the people who are viewing on TV can't participate. They can only observe.
Right, but how does that work when on a council meeting people comment on agenda items, go to the borough, that sort of thing? What would make that prohibitive to us to do the same sort of thing, Mike?
Well, it creates different issues, because remember, the council's not conducting a hearing where they're swearing in witnesses, marking exhibits, making sure that everyone can see and hear everyone who's participating. So if we're going to make it like this hybrid kind of thing, which some towns are talking about, we got to work through those situations.
I think it would purely be for public participation, for do any interested neighbors have something to say.
But that's still a hybrid hearing as opposed to just broadcasting it.
Okay.
And I got to tell you, I have concerns about it, because the more moving parts you have, the greater something can go wrong. Okay, so then you got to adapt your notices from start to finish. You got to change the whole process if you're going to have some kind of hybrid hearing. You got to change your notices. You have to make sure that people can have availability for the plans. What if an interested party wants to post an exhibit? Are they going to provide it in advance? Are they going to show it on a television set? These are all the things that we would have to work through. And I just, I don't want to be negative about these things, but the more moving parts you have, the greater chance something's going to go wrong, and somebody's going to sue us and say that there was some problem with the hearing. So we just have to think through if we're going to do that, as opposed to simply having either just a live hearing like we used to. If you want to participate, you come, or a live hearing like we used to and allow broadcast like on a television, but people observing it on TV can't participate. I mean, those are things that we're going to have to work through if you want to do some kind of hybrid process.
Are you trying to hide your negativity?
I don't think I hide it well.
So at the planning board, when this got discussed, we found out that we had one member who doesn't live in Fairhaven anymore, but is temporarily assigned to Ohio and is not able to regularly attend meetings because he can't be sure when he's going to be home and when he's going to be back. And another member
If he doesn't live in
decided that,
Fairhaven, he's not a member anymore.
so he lives in Fairhaven. What I said that wrong, and it actually he does live in Fairhaven. He's been temporarily assigned for work through December, out of state. He comes back and forth, but he can't be sure he's going to be here, and literally can't commit to being in hearings in December. And then one other member said that because of childcare issues, he'd really like the opportunity to do one or the other, and he wanted us to be able to provide both. So before your head falls off your shoulders, I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
So I will tell you this, that I could see situations where board members could zoom in, or where even our planner or engineer could zoom in. But when you start opening up the proceedings to interested parties to zoom in, that creates a whole different host of problems. You can do it with.
You don't see it more problematic for, look, I think the whole thing's a bad idea, and I couldn't contain myself, and I told them both that was a horrible idea. But you think it's less problematic for board members than
Yes.
objectors?
Yeah, I do. Because also when you look at the Open Public Meetings Act, there's some language in there about, and I don't have it in front of me, but appearing in person or by electronic means that you'd have to give notice. So I could see a situation, for instance, we had a situation where in another town where our engineer was exposed to someone who had COVID. Rather than cancel the meeting, they zoomed in the engineer. But the engineer had the equipment where we could hear her, she could hear us. She had the exhibits, she could view, there was a laptop set up in the room where she could see everything that was going on in the room, and it worked relatively well. But if to have all these interested parties zooming in, I think that creates a whole host of other problems. Would I prefer to have everyone in the room? Absolutely, including the board members and the professionals. Absolutely, I would. But if I had to zoom in one board member or one board professional, I think it's done a lot easier than if we're going to try and open the entire process to interested parties zooming.
It ain't gonna be one. If you start telling people it doesn't matter, you're gonna wind up with 5.
Well, that may be the point. That may be the point.
But there is a reason for that, and I'll give you a very specific example. If we were meeting in person last month, I had been exposed 2 days prior. I would, even though I've had it twice, I'm fully vaccinated, I have antibodies coming out, out of my ears, according to my most recent blood work, I still wouldn't have come to the meeting because I'm not going to sit in a room with you guys and, God forbid somebody gets sick, even though I don't wind up getting sick. So to have that fallback, I think is a useful option, because there are going to come times where somebody is legitimately sick. To your point, Todd, for, babysitting, or I'm on the road, I'm traveling, I'm doing this, I don't think that's a legitimate excuse. That's when you're like, well, you can't make the meeting. I'm not going to be at the meeting next month because I'm going to be out of the country on vacation. I'm certainly not zooming in from Bermuda.
I think that the idea of managing the situation, doing what we did tonight, and being able to read all of your faces, and for Brooks Bond Arch to be able to read all your faces and understand what's going on, the idea that some of us are there, some of us may not be there, managing that technology, I think that it's a disservice to the applicant to suggest that that's a fair equivalent. I feel as though it's on or off, but it's not up to me. I'm surprised by Mike's reaction. I'm watching closely Dr. Laufer, and I can stare at him without me knowing I'm staring at him. I don't know what we want to do, but my reaction is let's do all or nothing. Sam, where are you on this issue these days?
Todd, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt Dr. Laufer, just so we're clear, my preference is to have everybody in the room, period. But if we have quorum problems, for instance, then in what I'm going to call an emergent situation, I think we could manage it with a board member or board professional. What I really don't want to do is open it up to the public electronically, because I think that creates a whole host of problems.
And in fairness, everybody should know that my bad attitude on this subject partially relates to my attempt to be, a managing member of my group here at the office. And I've got people that have been mailing it in and, not coming in and participating. And it creates a lot of stress on everybody that's actually here. So I carry that resistance to the idea that some people don't have to show up. Anyway.
I interrupted Dr. Laufer. I apologize.
I don't think anybody really understands what's going on with this virus. I think it's been so politicized that you're not dealing with the science anymore. You're dealing with the politics. I still think that we have an issue with the virus. I think we have a system currently that works very well. Ideally, we should meet in person, but until we have a good understanding of what's going on and a good practical space in which to work, I think what we have going on, it works fine. That's my own personal feeling, and I know a lot of you will disagree with that, but that's how I feel.
What's the planning board doing, Todd?
Not making hard decisions.
I mean, about the meetings. Same thing?
Nothing. We didn't do anything. Am I wrong, Sandy?
So you're still Zooming?
We're still Zooming just like this. And I look, I got to say, I'm still at the office when I'm doing these things. If I have to come home for a meeting, I've got a half day at the office to get home for 7. So it's incredibly convenient. I think it's a disservice to the applicant. I think it's better when we're in person. I miss going out for drinks afterwards terribly. I think we should be getting back to normal. I never in a given month feel the urgency to do it next month. But the truth is that I feel like at some point we have to do it. I'm willing to go either direction. I really dislike the idea of hybrid because I think it will become a matter of convenience for people. And I think there will always be people that will find it easier to mail it in one night or the other, and that will make it harder to run a meeting.
When I suggested hybrid, I was only meaning it in terms of so members of the public could participate, not
I
for
think that's-
members of the board to do it.
I think that's an important add-on. I think that having people's ability to view the meeting via the OWL system is great. And, you know, frankly, Peter, we've been arguing that to the council for 10 years.
Yep.
That this should be available for people at home to watch. And so the fact that it's up and running is great. And if we're live, we should definitely push to get the OWL system to load it. What people can do from there, I think, is subject to Mike's comments and good guidance.
Fair enough. So what do? We put it to a vote? Do we?
How does everybody else feel? Anybody feel strongly one way or the other?
No, I would love to go back. I've been to, the first meeting I went to lasted for 15 minutes. The second meeting, I think we were there for an hour and a half. That's it. I've been on this board for 2.5 years. I've been to basically one meeting. So I would love to go back in person.
You're getting ripped off, Paul.
Well, I get
It's all the best parts of being on this board.
And Todd, is the governing body meeting in the room? that
Council
we-
chambers, they've been there for several months now.
They are.
The governing body is meeting in Fisk Chapel on Monday to try it out, to see if that works.
You should all come and watch the restaurant committee present.
Interesting.
I mean, to Skip's point, that is a small room. But
The
Do
one
you
in the
know how
basement?
other towns are going back to a new model?
all
Not that
my
we would do
towns,
that,
all my towns are live.
in person?
Yeah.
And have transitioned back and haven't made any enhancements to delivery of the information?
No, Long Branch was the last one to go back. The governing body, they were waiting on the governing body. The governing body went back. And the zoning board is going back the end of this month, live.
Have there been any issues, Mike, out of any of those places?
The West Long Branch, both the West Long Branch boards have been back live for about 6 months. The Monmouth Beach board has been back live almost a year.
And nothing
Nothing.
negative. I
No.
mean, I have no problem with it, but I'm just pointing out, you know, last month I was fine, but I wouldn't feel comfortable coming to the meeting, but I think we should go back live.
You know, and again, to Skip's point, I will say that all of those boards have larger rooms than we have in the borough. Initially, when they went back, they were spacing people out. They don't even bother to do that anymore. Initially, when they went back, you know, some folks were wearing masks. They don't bother to do that anymore. But again, that's a personal choice.
Mike, one of the other issues is we definitely need better space. I know that's not going to happen in the near future, but we definitely, that should be something that we should be looking at, you know, for the future, both in terms of council, planning and zoning.
You're not getting better space, but I wonder if anybody spent the time to even consider trying to install some ventilation. You know, I don't get the sense that there's even heating ducts in that basement, moving the air around, but you do have some windows. This is all above our pay grade.
Yeah. And if there were concerns, we could consider rotating or cycling in the applicants, you know, one application at a time. If you wanted, if you were looking at trying to minimize the number of folks in the room. Interested parties, of course, have the right to be there and sit through the entire proceeding if they like. But we could suggest that applicant number one comes in, and if you're not interested in this application, maybe you don't want to come in with them. And you know, it can be a little cumbersome, but there are things that you can do mechanically to try and improve the situation when you're dealing with a small room. But again, that's up to the board.
Just want to say, well, I appreciate the concerns. Council's been doing it for several months now,
Right. Yeah.
without issue. With full audiences, et cetera, et cetera.
Well,
I am
look,
curious to see how the Fish Chapel works out. My own experience is there. The acoustics are terrible, but curious to see what it's like with the number of people in the room and bodies and that sort of thing.
So whatever's decided, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. And so the truth is that any one of these events could wind up being a spreader event. You know, the school board meeting, the party from last weekend, I heard a bunch of people got sick. The correspondence dinner, last week, it wound up being one of these. I mean, the truth is, if you're going live, you're exposing yourself greater than you are today. And so I think the real question is whether or not, if we decided to go live, would any of you not come?
Wouldn't that also be under the assumption, though, that we're not going in any groups anywhere else outside of this, right? If we were virtual every day, all day, then us all getting together could potentially increase risk. But, I'm going into work and I'm around 20, 30, 40, 50 people a day. I think it's hard to separate out where the increased risk will lie. It all depends too on our personal and professional lives, right? And
I think that's 100% right for me, Drew. I feel like I do this, I have this sort of risk in my life now as it is, and I don't feel like this would materially change the other decisions that I'm making. I don't know how everybody else is running their lives.
Good point, Drew.
I'm still pretty sheltered.
I've had it definitely once, probably twice. So I am out in the world.
Well, on a side note, I would encourage everybody to get their antibodies checked.
Mine are through the roof as of last month still.
I think, you're kind of bulletproof, Paul, but I think it would be reasonable. I know personally I'm getting my antibodies checked, but I think everyone else should. I think that would increase your level of comfort. Look, we're all different too. I mean, everybody has a different risk tolerance and risk exposure.
And I'll share this anecdote, right? As I've gotten back up to speed in the professional sense, the expectation is when there's, an executive level meeting, you're there in person. However, the technology exists in such a way that if there's a COVID chance or a risk of getting everybody else sick, that we're professionals and that we don't abuse it. And I don't know if that is an acceptable use here. The environment's definitely changed, and the idea of a super spreader event, you can get someone very, very sick. So I think having that flexibility, but also the trust that we're going to be professionals and approach it from that manner. So Mike, back to what you were saying, if there's flexibility and decreasing the amount of risk it presents by allowing board members, if they choose to, go virtual because of a potential COVID exposure, or they're not feeling well and don't want to expose, we can develop policy procedure around that to kind of govern that in this new age. So I just offer that 2 cents.
Yeah, my preference is similar to Todd, that we're all in the same room if we're going to go back live. But in an effort to avoid emergency situations, that we're going to lose a quorum or something, or if one of our professionals can't attend for some reason, it might be better to Zoom them in. But for the most part, I would prefer everybody back in the room if we're going to go back in the room.
Yeah, so it's almost like that's the expectation. And if you're going to need to dial in virtually, it's acceptable given, the reasoning, and that trust is there. We're professionals and it's the right reason, and that we're not going to abuse the system. That's what I'm in favor of. And I'll just put that out there given it's 11 o'clock.
I would agree 100%, and I would agree to 10:30.
All right, well, a creative way of kicking this down the road would be for Mike, Irene, and Sandy to just evaluate what's available at the borough, and for Mike to be able to come back and let us know what's possible so that we really know what the ideas are. I don't know right now whether or not hybrid is legal, or whether or not there's an issue with any decisions that would be developed through a model that included applicants, objectors, and or board members being in different locations, and what the opportune mix would be.
Well, I tell you, my advice to the board would be that we don't do a hybrid with the public, that we really don't do a hybrid at all. That we do, if you want to, when you're ready to go in person, we go in person. But in those rare circumstances where we need to make a quorum, if we need to have a board member Zoom in, we can do that under the Open Public Meetings Act. They can participate in the meeting and that'll make a quorum. You could do it electronically, which I assume means you could do it by telephone, assuming somebody could see the exhibits. So if we have the technology to allow a board member to zoom in the rare circumstance where we need to do it, we could do it. If we don't have that technology, then that board member is not going to participate, and we either have a quorum or we don't.
I don't think we have that technology. You're throwing it
Then-
around. I don't think we can Zoom somebody down to council chambers. I think we can do the owl. I think we could do a phone call and have them be on the phone, but I don't think we can Zoom them.
Why,
So
why
then-
would we
then-
not be able to do that? Council can do it.
We can Zoom them in, but we don't have monitors down there so everyone can see the person that's on Zoom. So there's a computer down there that's connected to the owl. That's where Betsy sat when we were at the planning board meeting. But there's no monitor to project a person who's coming in from the outside for everyone to see them, nor is there really a good way if somebody wants to bring in a new exhibit in the meeting to project it out so it can truly be seen, unless we set some parameters on when documents were received and you wouldn't allow them to bring in a new document during the hearing.
So again, assuming we're not opening it up to the world, that when we go live, we expect to all be in the room, but if there is an emergent situation where a board member has to zoom in or a board professional, if the board professional or the board member can see what's going on in the room and the people in the room can see and hear that person, which we may be able to plug a laptop into the system, it's doable in an emergency. But the suggestion would be when you decide to go live, you're pretty much planning on being live and in person.
And Mike, the technology exists to put it on the TV monitor, share screen. If someone's going to bring in an exhibit, physical exhibit, there's mechanisms. I can go to Best Buy, right? And
But I would suggest that we
Yeah, but
don't
the
want to.
technology exists to give us all email addresses too. The borough's not gonna pay for.
But I would suggest, Drew, that at least in my opinion, we should not be going there because then we've got a hybrid hearing. I'm suggesting once you decide to go in person, you're live and in person, but in that rare circumstance where if we have to Zoom in a board member or the board professional, we could do it as long as that board member or professional can see and hear what's going on in the room and the people in the room can hear and see the board member.
I think that's where we are. I think the choice is to go back live with the understanding that if Paul gets exposed again and needs to call in and we need him for a quorum, that we'll deal with that at the moment. And that we would broadcast via OWL with the consent of council, and whether we could hear from people and they could give feedback, we could deal with that later. But the idea would be that we'd certainly project that information out so people could see it at home.
Do we know if this OWL thing is of any type of subscription or limited usage?
It's $100 a user, or we can get a free account on Gmail.
No, the OWL.
I know, I was kidding. Betsy's here. Can we bring Betsy forward? She's got all the answers. Betsy's gonna know, I would hope.
Yeah. My real question is, does it cost the borough anything for us to broadcast on that in addition to whatever usage the council already, gets on?
Yeah, I got it. I would think that'd be money well spent, frankly, to get our meetings up and available to people, much more than the emails, frankly, because we don't use it.
Yeah.
You there, Bets?
I'm here.
What do you think? Can we get on Al if we went live?
Yes, you can. But the problem with OWL is if you have somebody in that's zooming in, that's in the audience, they have to type in their questions and someone has to read them.
I think though the question was, can we simply broadcast like a television show? And not,
Yes.
and just make it one way?
Absolutely.
So does that answer your question, Todd? You can broadcast, so anybody who wants to watch can watch, but they're not participating in the hearing without being in the room.
Sounds like a horrible television show. Yeah, I was sure that we could do that. And I remember now that Betsy's making that comment that that's really the way they have to deal with people interacting from the outside. And the question, Mike, for you, and we don't need to decide tonight because it's really late, but would be whether or not that is sufficient to be able to even invite people to participate from the outside relative to cross-examination and all the rest of the things that we need to have a sustainable decision.
I
You know,
don't know how you
we
would-
actually did this. I don't remember if, I think it was the planning board, Todd, where we used the owl. We did have a meeting,
Did
a
we,
planning board meeting.
I know we projected it, but did we hear from people?
The only way you could hear from anybody, I remember I was sitting at the computer where
Big-
Teresa normally sits during council meetings. And if anybody had a remark or an observation or a question, they would type it in and I would read it to the group.
But who would have to be sworn in order to do that? The person on the other end or?
Well, it was
you
just a
reading the
question.
typed Statement, that's the thing, well.
Yeah,
but
they
we
weren't
swear
giving
everybody in.
evidence. They were just asking a question.
Yeah, it's the
Right.
technical difference between having a meeting and having a hearing.
Exactly.
And Mike's got this under control. I don't want to take it any further. I think that it's great to know that we've got it, Betsy. I think it's very useful to know that we can broadcast. Does anyone want to take a vote now about going back in person as soon as possible?
Yes.
One head nod. I'm indifferent. As soon as possible is July, by the way, just in time to interfere with your summer vacations.
Exactly.
Good.
Do we
I'll
need
make
a
Need a
motion.
motion and a vote and everything, Todd, or?
I make a motion that we tentatively target coming back live in July,
Well,
barring any.
we need to start sending notices. So it's a commitment that we have to make and we need to start letting people know right away. I'm agnostic. I'm going to be, I'm not voting. I'm going to abstain, but I'll go with the majority.
Hey,
Then I will make a motion that we begin live meetings in July, so we can start getting the notices and everything else out.
I'll second that.
Mr. Nick Chesney,
Yes.
Mr. Ridgway,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. La Barbera,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
No.
Mr. Kinsella,
Yes.
Mr. Leader.
I'm going to abstain, but I'm looking forward to drinks.
No, you can't, no drinks for you.
So Sandy, we're going to have to get an Open Public Meetings Act notice out in advance. And presumably then we're going to let whoever gets set on the agenda, whatever applicants are set on the agenda for July, to let them know that they're going to have to revise notices. The notices are going to have to say that we're live and in person. It's going to be the old notice without all the Zoom stuff in it. Okay, you're
And so-
muted. And we're also going to want to get it up on the website too, when we do the Open Public Meetings Act notice.
So the people that are, if they don't finish in June, will they have to do a new notice for July?
Well, but remember in June, we can announce it on the Zoom meeting that we'll be back, we'll be continuing live in July, so we can make the announcement.
Okay,
Just like we announced for Mr. Aiken's client tonight, that it's going to be Zoomed, continued to Zoom in June. But anybody that's giving notices, first out notices for July, they should be using the in-person information. And we got to get an Open Public Meetings Act notice out in advance.
okay.
So I spent too much time joking around or not enough time being serious. Now that we've done this, we have to be resilient. All right. So a whiff of something going on, we have to hold this. Not that we can't change our mind, but what I really didn't like last time is that we kind of bop back and forth, and I hate that. So we got to try and hold this. But I think it sounds good.
Keep your hands clean.
Right.
All right, moving on. Porter Resolution 87 Lewis Lane. I will make a motion to approve the resolution as written.
Second.
Oh, wait a minute.
You can't.
I can't do that.
You were
I wasn't here.
recused. Yep.
I recused. Oops.
Somebody want to make a motion
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution as approved.
by
Thank you.
Dr. Laufer, second
Second.
by Mr. Kinsella.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Ridgway,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. La Barbera,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsella,
Yes.
and that's it.
Okay. Pimpinella Resolution 435 River Road. I think I was here for that one.
You were.
Okay, then I'll make a motion to accept the resolution as written.
Second.
All right, Mr. McChesney,
Yes.
Mr. Ridgway,
Yes.
Mr. La Rivera,
Yes.
Dr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsella.
Yes.
That's
Is
it.
that it, Peter?
That is it.
I got two members of the public left. Do either of the participants care to step forward and make any comments before we go home? Oh, boy. Susan accepted.
Bringing forward Mrs. O'Brien.
Greetings, Ms. O'Brien.
Hi. Well, I have to say about the technological thing, Zoom is much better than the OWL. However, the Environmental Commission did use the OWL for their last meeting. And when you look at how American business is functioning these days via technology, I mean, my daughter works for a company, they're spread all over the world, and she works from home. So I think it's a problem stepping back from using technology. I actually, and this is to, for Mike's benefit, I actually attended a legal hearing via Zoom in Freehold.
Oh, they're doing trials by Zoom.
Absolutely.
Well, that's not the issue. The issue is the hybrid nature of it. We're having a hearing right now via Zoom. The question is whether or not we can juggle both live and Zoom.
Well, I think the OWL needs to upgrade. It's just not as good as Zoom.
Betsy, you got that?
Yes, I do.
Oh, I'll agree with you. I agree with you, Susan. I watch council meetings on the OWL, and it's fine when they broadcast the dais, but if anybody gets up to speak, it's terrible.
It wasn't even that great at the Environmental Commission meeting.
Betsy, I don't know, have you gotten feedback like that from people? Because when I watch online, and somebody in the public gets up to say something, it's very difficult to hear. I don't know if the council's aware of that.
The problem with, you can't Zoom in Borough Hall. You can't have 7 people, or actually it's probably more like 9 or 10 Zooming at the same time in Borough Hall. They don't have the bandwidth to accommodate that. So the only way that you could Zoom is if everybody stayed home.
No, what I'm saying is that the OWL needs to upgrade and have more of the capability that Zoom does.
Well, unfortunately,
Talk to OWL product manager.
yeah, the OWL product that we have doesn't allow for that. So it's either or.
Or there's something else out there that might work better.
Possibly, but I know that we use the IT people from the high school, and this is what they use in Rumson and in the high school. But maybe there is a better product out there.
Especially these days, with many businesses relying on their technology for just doing business, having meetings, whatever. I'll have to ask my daughter. She may know.
Good.
Okay, that was my 2 cents for tonight.
Thank you, Susan. Anybody have anything else for the good of the order?
Thought as a compromise, we could continue with Zoom and meet for drinks afterwards.
I love that
Only-
plan. But I gotta
Only
have that
kidding.
around. You guys should do it.
So Todd and Sandy, just to repeat, I am not here next meeting. I am not in person, not in Zoom. I will not be here. So plan accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
You guys did great tonight. This was a great meeting. I just really proud of this board. You guys do an excellent job, and that was a very, very difficult application. So nice job.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks,
Thank
Todd.
you.
Guys.
Good night, everybody.
Hey,
All right,
everybody.
See ya. Bye.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.